In a stunning late-night operation, I had some friends of mine execute a raid on my neighbor Tom's house. He put up quite a fight, but we got through, and he's in custody. I haven't liked what he's been doing over there for a while now, so I've decided to run his house myself. He leaves his Christmas lights up too long. He never trims his avocado tree that hangs over my fence, and I believe he's running fentanyl out of there. I can't prove the last one, but it makes sense. I've seen him speak Spanish. I got rid of the wife as well. I didn't really have a problem with her, but we did do a 4th of July block party, and she brought empanadas, so better safe than sorry. I've got them at a Residence Inn a couple towns over. I've been using his home as my own little man cave. Pretty great. It turns out he has a fantastic wine cellar that I have tapped into extensively. Anyway, I'll be running his home until a time when I can have a safe, proper, and judicious turnover to some other guy. Which probably won't be happening soon. And just a heads up, I plan to take over some other neighbors' homes as well. Phil, across the street, has a pretty cool car I'd like to be in charge of. And Alex, who lives catty corner from me, has a wife who's a yoga instructor. Be taking that one soon. Again, doing it for the good of the neighborhood, so stay tuned.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Tuesday, January 6th, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. An interesting series of developments in this Venezuela conversation. We had a recent dive around, what we could prove at the time and different theories about what happened. And I still, most of almost everything what we covered is still, I think, exactly, it's very relevant to what we're currently seeing. And I don't think that we ultimately have insight onto exactly how this is playing out just yet. But what's developed, I was speaking with Robert over the last couple of days as well, and these are some things that were sort of swirling around for me when we were first going over this. But at the point, it was really just, just opinion. And now there's some different developments with Delcy Rodriguez, the way that the conversation's gone down, how Trump has discussed it, what she said, and it just kind of the discrepancy within all of that opened up different possibilities, which is very much discussed right now. Over the last couple of days, I've seen this discussed quite broadly, which I'm glad to see, because in the past, people tend to have, a tendency to be worried about having these kind of conversations, as we all know, because typically people that strike out ahead and have, thought-provoking theories tend to get disregarded by the partisanship. But the point comes down to, like I titled this today, is it possible that Maduro made a deal? My mind would say likely through coercion, but still ultimately made a deal with Trump to execute what happened. And then beyond that, just to explain the title, is it possible that if that's the case, and we'll go into the other sides of that as if that wasn't the case, hypothetically, if it was the case, and go over what makes more sense. But if there was an agreement made, and let's say that was with Delcy, that ultimately that was part of that would be Delcy Rodriguez carrying this out. Not to say that that means she's necessarily on the side of the Venezuelan people or Maduro and his administration. There's a lot of interesting parts to get into around her connections that go way back with Trump and the U.S. administration. But the point would be, even if that's the case, is it possible that now she, through other dynamics and other interests of the people around her, are in a way double-crossing Trump or his administration? But it does seem to be Donald Trump spearheading this, seemingly with Stephen Miller largely. But is it possible that we're seeing just a multifaceted kind of agenda playing out, and that ultimately they strong-arm this into a certain situation, got what they wanted, at least in getting Maduro out of the way, thinking that they, like last time, by the way, had enough influence with the larger administration? They failed last time. And we'll go over this again briefly. We brought it up last time, where they thought they had enough influence. They were told by insiders that they had, that the military was going to turn and jump on their side, and they lied to them and made them look really bad, sided with Maduro. And so now at this point, the question is, where does that reside? Because that's really what typically, historically, is where that the final, rather the most important factor. where the enforcement arm leans. Clearly, that makes sense. So today, with what we're going to go through, these are questions we should be asking. And I get the sense that there is more going on, that even, like I said, if there was an agreement that was made, which does seem to be likely right now, that ultimately you could even argue that would be just out of self-interest. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily on the side. But I argue, to start out with this obvious point, that what happens next will tell us everything. I shouldn't say everything. It's rarely the case, but ultimately what they do, what she does, where probably the most important one, what happens to the assets of this country. Not necessarily what they're just grabbing and stealing, right? But like the processes through it, like what she decides to do is if there's some removal of the, there's more than just oil, nationalized assets in regard to selling out to corporations. And she's in line with that decision and goes through the actual government to make that happen. If there's more sort of sellout of Venezuelan interests in the interest of multinational corporations, I think that will say everything, even if it's just that she's no longer in control, as we're going to get into, because she's being threatened by outside powers. Or again, maybe it's just that she was always on the other side and maybe she sold out Maduro. So let's go through all this and discuss it, because it's always the way that this game tends to work inside the partisanship is that there's a narrative that's picked up on, and that narrative will be hammered in, jamming the round peg in the square hole or vice versa, until it becomes very clear that just no one's paying attention anymore. And that kind of shifts into some alternative version that maybe allows some steam to release, but still continues the lie. We saw that with a lot with Israel's propaganda. It's still happening right now. So ask ourselves whether that could be the case, or, many different factors. But today we're going to go over some starting points that I think are very relevant, as I think always are, of just, and I believe this is unprecedented, and not that it's clearly not happened before. Propaganda, AI videos, and all that has always been there in the sense of, let's just say, manipulated content has always been there. But right now, just like I said last time, and I also agreed then, I've never seen that much. It's now stepped even further. I honestly have yet to find any honest content in the realm of the whole team sport politics. Venezuelans are crying because they're so happy. And that's not to say that doesn't exist. I could almost guarantee to some degree that's out there. But if they have to constantly make everything up, what does that tell you? And I just think that it could just be that they find that whoever's managing the narrative, Elon Musk, whatever it is, I'm just kind of being facetious. Is it more that it's just easy to cultivate the narrative if you just make it all up, even though there might be real examples? It's an interesting time that we're in. But I think it's very important to highlight how much of that, and then even Grok will show all of the main people in the right side are the ones, you name it, like a who's who of the right-wing team sport manipulators. And it's like this one, I'll show you. It's humorous to me. All of them listed from top to bottom, sharing either the same videos amongst themselves or variations of the lies. We'll go through it. It speaks for itself. And some other discussions around that, articles written about the perspective, people who are a couple of points of people who were going regime change bad and now going, yay, free oil, even though that's never the way that works out, at least not for you. And some conversation about the way that this is happening. Totally not a war, we're told. It's totally within the law, despite those both being completely incorrect. And the reality of the legalities around all of this, the point about oil resources more broadly. I want to make a very clear point about Delcy Rodriguez today and how interesting it is that there's multiple even corporate media articles talking about deals that were made before, her inside connections. And really, it's just come out clearly already. And this is, I believe, from the Wall Street Journal. This is from yesterday. CIA concluded regime loyalists were best placed to lead after Maduro. So then what was all the Machado conversation about? Is that something they decided last minute because they realized nobody was going to support them, which is kind of my point all the time. He's another Guaido, but realizing that they needed some level of consistency here, or rather just continuity, which means that either she is on his side or, we'll get into all the what ifs, but that the CIA made the decision. Is that democracy? Which did they decide, not the Venezuelan people? It just kind of it mocks the entire argument of what they claim this is all about, which in and of itself shows you that these people don't care about any of that. But that it's ultimately showing that there was a decision made, at least they're arguing, to lean into her. The question is she part of that conversation, and is she even aware of that? But obviously that's very relevant. And of course, the overlap with China and the possibility of a deal that might have been made. And a lot of other points we can get into, I think, just possibly depending on time, and some overlapping. The one large point that I want to get to at the end is the network state part, which maybe we could push that off because I don't think that's, I mean, I very much personally, as you know, think that's very relevant to this conversation, but it's important, I think, just to make sure we understand the meat and potatoes of what's happening here. But I very much think, as I think we'll have time for, that this is a central part of this, at least when it comes to the powerhouses, the oligarchs, the technocrats who are behind the scenes funding most everything we're talking about. And that they have very clear designs. And I mean, there's multifaceted. Let's just make, it's not just one group all the time, but I mean, in the sense of the people interested in this, the Pronomos Capital part of this, the startup cities elements, like these are groups that you can very clearly weave together predominantly with teal type funding, are all interested in a lot of this. Greenland, Venezuela, and openly about charter cities, freedom cities, smart cities, all the same thing. Very interesting to me. And now, as I said before, I think these are all just there's multiple agendas playing out at once. And it's up for you to decide if you think one's driving the rest of them or the other way around. But it's important to recognize that that is part of this, and we'll go through it. And I think that to me, the reason it's so important is because that's a longer term dynamic. It's not just about taking control of this for X outcome, but really about trying to reshape the way that we engage with government, the way that our society operates, the way that we exist amongst ourselves. Like, it's weird and on the surface. And it doesn't even get enough attention in my mind amongst the independent media. But again, I could be wrong, but I'm going to continue to always show you what I think is important, because that's what you're here for. If I just simply tailored what I covered based on what I think you want to hear, that would make me like every other part of the mainstream alternative media. We're not going to do that. So to start off with this, shout out to this guy. I just think this was absolutely, oh, come on.
Compare lately in the
okay, guys, it's not letting me share. There we go. Thank God. I was about to freak. It's like, you guys know that I've been following it. There's just like one step away from all this stuff. We're dealing with some just ridiculous stuff. I'm not going to get into that today. I was right there for some reason. It wasn't bringing up the share window, and that would just be me talking the whole time, which I would do anyway. But so shout out to this guy. This is just where I saw it first. Molly Ploufkin shared this. Man conducts regime change in his neighborhood in the spirit of Trump's takeover of Venezuela. And so this is actually this guy here. And I want to make one quick point about this. I've seen him around, wasn't familiar with his name, Jamie Kaler, probably Kaler. You pick. He's only got about 7,000 followers. He's on Tacoma FD. You might have seen that on, show My Boys and different things. So this video, by the way, has made the rounds. I mean, you guys have seen it. I bring this up, I talked about AM Wake Up this morning, and it seems to be, I mean, even this guy shared this and almost has 1 million views, or rather, Molly shared this. Almost 1 million views, right? This is how broken and ridiculous this false, I don't know what you call it. I keep talking about that there is no organic viral anymore. This needs to make this point very clear. I think you guys already agree with this, but so here he is sharing this. Okay, this is him. This is his video. He posts this video. Okay. Now that's who's to say whether or not it's, like this is probably more popular over here. Yeah, this has got more engagement on TikTok for sure. But why is it not something? So it gets posted here and it gets shared around on Twitter, but yet his post itself, where he posted this, doesn't seem to get much engagement. I just think it shows you what I'm talking about is Twitter alone, by the way. This platform, and I think it's the same everywhere else, very clearly, I think it's about who and how and where, not just organic flow of who likes it and when and whether, that's what it should be, just an organic flow of the way things are shared. But I think we all know that's not how it works. On that point, though, aside, which I'm sure you guys are already well familiar with, I just think this was a very well put together video. Of course, it gets regarded as partisan. And he probably, I don't know his politics. Most things seem to be today. But aside from all of that, even if he is being driven by an I hate Trump motive, it is exactly the reality, right? You're doing this, like this is what I was trying to say before on like, hey, Wake Up This Morning and others, is that even if like you agree with what's happening, like there's a lot of this kind of like, I'm so proud to be an American, as you're watching bombs go and kill people in other countries, like we always did, the media always does. There's nothing about this in any way that aligns with what, at least let's just say Republicans or anyone for that matter, at least express they think things should be, or what they claim we should want. Freedom, liberty, democracy, whatever it is. And they also talk about might makes right and having a good military. But at the end of the day, it's not that at all costs we take what we want. That is basically the way this plays out, but that's not what people are expressing. The idea is that this is about freedom and stopping the evildoers and helping everybody in the world and saving the Venezuelans. But that doesn't even that itself does not line up with the actions being taken. There is international law, there is domestic law, neither of which allows what just happened. We'll get into the lie, Article 2, and the way that they played this game. There is no reality in which the way this just went down is just okay to do, and then we'll follow up with Congress. Now, I'm aware of the way that's supposed to work. But the Article 2 dynamic, and even the way that they play this since I've been alive, it's always taken advantage of the national security dynamic, as well as the fact that this in no way is about national security in any which way they play it. They've already removed the fentanyl claim and everything else from the indictment, so they're just laughing at you. But why would taking things without authorization and seizing assets from the Venezuelan people during all of that be somehow about freedom? And then that's why this is such a good video, because it's identical to the reality, just a smaller example. I'm going to take his house because I don't like what he's doing. I'm going to seize this one next because he's got cool things. I mean, it's just funny to me how perfectly made that video is. But, you get people engage with it the way that they want to see it. But shout out to him for doing a really well-timed video on that. So on that same note, though, what you're getting, and this is, I argue, these are the kind of people that are desperate, whatever the word is, acting like that's not accurate because that guy hates Trump, even though him hating Trump has nothing to do with whether it's accurate. That just becomes kind of the deflective, deflection of anything that highlights the point. Well, as I said, and Shipwreck posted this out on the 4th, all of the usual suspects from this, and this is even more ridiculously obvious today, from Nick Sorter to Alex Jones to Benny Johnson, are being caught, even by Twitter, sharing blatantly fake images and videos of Venezuela and Iran, by the way. Venezuela seems to be the current focal point more than anything else, but Iran is still going on. Robert is working on something right now. I'll share his article at the end today, where I already showed you guys, but it's very, very clear what's going on. The Shah that they keep pointing to, the son of the previous Shah, he's got zero following in Iran, not zero, but he has no popular support. Not here, not there. It is just exiled monarchists and governments, as usual. But back to Venezuela, the same kind of thing, though. You're seeing them just scream out things, and all of them, Alex, the rest, they just continually, at the very least, repeat and share things without any due diligence, which, by the way, shouldn't be that shocking. They're caught for this stuff every day. But on top of that, they're manufacturing some of this stuff. They're making false things. And I think what we need to continue to see is these people are deliberately trying to mislead people for the agenda. Shouldn't be that shocking to most of you. This is just a screenshot. I'll show you the actual clips, or rather posts. This is Benny Johnson. Massive crowds have taken to the streets of Venezuela. Nope, that's actually Chile. Sorry. And what's funny to me is some of them delete it. I'll show you, like Wall Street Apes deleted one, but here it is. It's a fake video. He's fact checked. This thing has almost 2 million views. But if you look at most of the comments, other than, that's funny, even people that tend to support what they're doing is like, hey, that's not the right place. But it's good that it's being called out. I haven't seen Derek's and so on, but the majority of the flow of this content is people that are using it, sharing it. I mean, look at the quote tweets. Look at everyone that shares it, which is the point. It becomes Alex and Nick and all the rest who then share from him and tag each other and share. And it becomes this 1 million follower circle of control. Like that becomes, and think of it like this. These platforms weight heavily towards the influence. So if you've got millions of followers, that's considered a weighted, more of a valuable piece of content. So when you have all of this inner circle of 1 million follower people basically circling around false information, it creates a false perspective, even from the AI's perspective. They're doing this very deliberately, if you want my gut opinion. Here is Alex Jones. This video shows protests that are from July 2024. And he's saying millions of Venezuelans flood the streets and others in celebration of the ouster of Nicolas Maduro. So you can't try to be like, no, he just means they're happy in general and they hate him in general. No, that's what they're all trying to do. No, he said as if it was after he was taken. He's just repeating what other people are pointing to. Now, clearly, as you can see, this is something he posted. So either he decided to grab it from somebody else that shared it without crediting them, that they do all the damn time, or he just lied to people, knew it was fake. Or who knows? Clearly, they're incorrect. And certainly in an honest world, that should make a difference, shouldn't it? Here, Alex Jones again. What a surprise. Using a video that is from the World Cup celebration. So that's multiple posts. And by the way, you could go through and look. I'll show you something from Grok pointing them out, which I find funny. The corporate media is refusing to cover Venezuelans celebrating around the world. Incorrect. Not even that, oh, he meant Venezuelans anywhere. Nope, that's also not in Miami, guys. This is a video from the World Cup celebration. All around this is happening. What is it? 2 million views. Let's see how much it's gone up since we grabbed this earlier today. Look at that. It went up 100,000 views since we grabbed this, even though it's posted as fake. Oh, look at this. I'm so glad this happened. This is what I was going to point out a second ago. Do you note what's now not there anymore? This is so incredibly important because this is provably fake. Or excuse me, not fake, but provably from a previous time, the World Cup. There's other examples of this too. Here's this one, which they also took away. This is absolutely crazy to me. I had these up front because they had the Twitter things. You can prove, by the way, that these are not what they claim. Look it up for yourself. And I'll even show you what Grok is saying. But here's what's interesting. Right now, Twitter, or who knows, Elon Musk, as he tends to manipulate these from the back, he's removing the screenshots. In fact, check this out. I'm pretty sure I even grabbed one to make sure, just in case. No, that's the other one. I'll show you in a second. Make sure I didn't take a screenshot of it. But this is so wild to me that they're removing these in real time. So even though we know it's fake, even though Twitter already said it's fake, they take away the community note. Why would that possibly be what happens? See, look, I knew somebody, Simon Godek is on it because we're watching this. You should stop tweeting for a while and it's getting embarrassing. But it's gone now. See what it said 30 seconds ago? The video shows crowd celebrating in Argentina 2022, which I verified. You can check for yourself. It's actually very easy by what they're showing in Buenos Aires. Why does it not say that anymore? That's absolutely crazy to me. And I shouldn't say it's crazy. We all know this. So we have to understand, this is Twitter, maybe Grok in and of itself, or Elon, or somebody influencing this, taking away a community note that very clearly identifies this as a fake, or rather a misattributed video. Isn't that important? It should be. Same thing here. Venezuelans celebrate the capture of Maduro. No, that's the same post. It's the same place, but they took it away. This one has 9 million views. See, people are being gaslit. Now, this is not some accidental or, I believe the wrong narrative. This is platforms on Twitter, or other accounts on Twitter and the platform itself cultivating a false narrative. This is deliberate. This is straight up cultivating, gaslighting, trying to convince you of things that aren't true. But they got 9 million views, so all they do is just quietly remove the community note, and then nobody knows any better. And then it becomes, Democrats down here arguing about, whatever. That's the easy way to ignore this. Here's Nick Shirley. Wait a minute. The mainstream media lied to us again. The people of Venezuela didn't actually lie. Nope, actually, that's Miami. That one's still there. Let's see if that goes away. Still there. Sharing pictures from Miami. Nick Shirley, of course. Here's Wall Street Apes. This one's still up. A crying woman. Right? Saying Venezuelans are crying on their knees, thanking Trump and America for freeing them, except that's an AI-generated video. You could easily verify for yourself. I mean, it's wild, isn't it? Like, for those that haven't seen this, you're probably going, what? This is like a fraction of how much is going on out there. This is completely fake. Why would they, two things, need to make it fake if it's so obvious? Secondarily, these people are not checking anything, which you should know by now. Biggest Mac simply says, Elon Musk retweeted that video, which he did. Here's a whole article on it. Musk reshares AI-generated Venezuelan celebration clip. But that's not new. He did this during the South African genocide discussion. He did this during the Venezuela last discussion, the elections, where he claimed they were stealing things. Nope, that ended up being an old video and those air conditioners. It just doesn't change anything. They just keep screaming. Which, by the way, to be clear, I'm not calling for them to be censored. They have every right to lie. They can stand up every day and be wrong and lie all they want. The only reason this becomes a problem is because the government's working with them to completely gaslight you on top of it, or censoring you for calling it out. I mean, this is everywhere you look right now. What we need is not more censorship. What we need is more words, more conversation, more information on top of everything else, because it's all there. If this was an honest engagement, everybody would already know they were lying and it wouldn't be as manipulative, but they are manipulating. Now, this is just Grok asking for a list. And what's funny is I put a list of all the examples you can find. And just quickly, first one it responds, of course, Nick Shirley, Alex Jones, Elon Musk, Laura Loomer. No surprise there. But I gave me 5 and I said, okay, wait a minute. I said, now give me 10 more. Links, please. Oh, and what do you know? It managed to find 10 more. Wall Street Apes. I'm Emiller4IM. Visorgrad24. Don't miss the obvious Zionist overlap emojis. Gunther Eagleman, Eric Doherty, Redline News, MAGA Voice, Barron Trump. You could have guessed this and written this out and known how it would work out. I mean, look at this. And I say, give me 20 more. with the community notes listed. And the point is, you couldn't have given me all these to begin with. Wall Street Apes, Nick Shirley, Alex Jones, Breaking 911, Mia Joy. Yeah, it's the same people you see every single time. Incredible. Now, here's one that Wall Street Apes deleted. Still there. You can check it in regard to, if there's an archive. The link, is still there. And I just simply showed this one again. This is Wall Street Apes, and I'm just every single time, shameless grifters. Here's another one they shared, which is all, and just to be clear, all of these are fake. Whether because you could prove it in independent, showing an old video from a different time, out of context, or in this case, AI created information. This one was also taken away by Twitter. But as Grok will list for you, if you look at the link I just shared, these are all listed as incorrect content. But this one's still there. That's why he didn't delete it, I guess, in regard to not having the community note anymore. Same with this. All of these down, let me see if this one still has it. Nope. These are all out of context, either claiming they are where they're not, or an AI thing, or or some outdated content. Same with this one, or not this one. This was this one here. I mean, therefore I am showing this old video, and here's Megatron even calling them out. Be aware, propaganda war. Basically, all the Zionists, Trump propagandists, are posting old videos, labeling them as, oh my God, people are celebrating the fall of Maduro. This is an old video from September 2023, showing Venezuelans celebrating a soccer win. You see, they go, I just meant they were Venezuelans. Well, guess what? In many of these videos, they're not even celebrating what they claim they're celebrating. But think about this and then ask yourself why they would take away the note. Same point. It's now gone. Just keeps happening. Barron Trump. No, he showed you most of these. This one up here, you can see these are all either AI or fake or from somewhere else. The whole thing. Barron Trump news. Just in, fake news is losing it. Isn't that the perfect thing to see? The fake news is losing it while you lie about what your narrative is. But that's all it takes to get people to go, yeah, the Democrats are all liars, or vice versa. That, yeah, the Nazis are all going to lie. It's just the partisan blindness. Alex Jones, of course, and he's tagging this amongst other tweets he was putting out. He says, for the people who are geopolitically illiterate and don't understand why Trump did what he did, this may help. Yeah, this may help. I can't even believe he's this ridiculous. He posts a video from a Jack Ryan show from Prime Video. That's not a joke. Literally, this is exactly, I agree with what Dave said. Thank you, Alex Jones, for providing a clip from a TV show that the CIA helped produce, easily verifiable, to explain to us why we need war with Venezuela. This guy is a cartoon, man. He says, you're witnessing a return to the Monroe Doctrine. First of all, he does statements like that almost does make it sound as if he's like, is that a good thing, Alex? You might argue he meant that as a bad thing. Well, watch the way he shares this. He's all rah-rah Trump, freedom America at this point, acting like this is saving everybody, better oil prices. What you're pointing to is straight up government propaganda to explain why we should believe the government narrative. You might as well be CNN, bud. That's embarrassing, but here we are. Al McLeod says Santiago Oria saying, no, you don't understand. Trump crossed a line. This has to be resolved with international law, showing a video of people being tortured. But guess what? That's actually a scene from a Netflix show. And that's what Alan McLeod is pointing out. And that's what it says down here. He says the video showing Maduro allegedly torturing Venezuelan dissidents that's going around and going viral, 15 million views. Only problem, it's actually from a movie. Just think about how grotesque this all is, and yet it continues. You'll probably bump into people that act like this is real, even once you prove it's false, and they go, no, that's probably just them faking the community notes. Just like a willful disregard for the information. Okay, here's Hindustan Times. Fact check. Did Trump share an old video claiming millions of Venezuelans were celebrating his capture? Yes, he did. He released a video that claims to show large crowds celebrating the recent capture of Maduro. However, that was actually from 2024. But they don't care. Just doesn't stop. Here's Wired. Disinformation floods social media after Nicolas Maduro's capture. Some people shared old videos across social media platforms falsely claiming that they showed the attack on Venezuelan capital Caracas. Now remember, just like we told you with the Ukraine part, they wanted people to think that this was just collapsing at the Capitol to cause the reaction that they didn't have to they could invade militarily and do that, and then that people would react to the collapse of the country if they were capable of doing that. The question is if they are. Or they could just pretend that happened and people might react as if that's the way it happened and then almost cause that with no real effort. Now, that works if you have enough control over the narrative, but ultimately they don't today. And it says on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, people shared AI-generated images and videos that claim to show the DEA and various law enforcement personnel arresting Maduro. In recent years, now remember, this was on the 3rd. Now, what's interesting is even in the beginning of this, Grok was disagreeing that he was being arrested. He was saying that's not true. In recent years, major global incidents have triggered huge amounts of disinformation on social media as tech companies have pulled back efforts to moderate their platforms. Yeah, guys, don't you get it? We can't just allow them to lie to us, so they're going to need to censor everybody, right? Doesn't that make sense? Shouldn't Elon Musk censor us all because he's lying to us? Let's fall right into that lazy trap. That's what they're doing in one way, using Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste. Let's think of a Mountainhead, the movie we talked about. Feels very similar, doesn't it? Not deep fakes necessarily, but we're getting into that territory where major global events are being completely, I don't want to say destabilized, but like an event that's already causing chaos is being driven into absolute mayhem because of this flow. Now, this flow of disinformation is not about just allowing people to say what they want. People have always been allowed to say what they want in some degree. This is because of the way that they're using this whole system by propping up false morons out there to let them scream what they're basically being driven to do in order to use that to cultivate your own narrative. It's sort of how like the FBI will throw tips to themselves and then point to the tip in the media and be like, now we can act. That's how this is working, guys. It's being engineered. I mean, and whether it's every part of it or not, that is a provable idea. And it says many accounts have sought to take advantage of these lax rules to boost engagement and gain followers. Yes, but the idea that saying things like you're allowed to be dishonest, guys. It's dishonest, and I'll call you a dishonest person, but you're allowed to lie. You're allowed to be wrong. In the world they're trying to create with this by them deliberately misleading you and allowing very prominent idiots out there to constantly lie to you using fake information we're all allowed to do that. It is the way it's being propped up and the way it's being used against you that's the problem. So as before, not less words, more information, more conversation. If we're just able to have an actual conversation about the way this is working, things might be different. Now it says, within minutes of the news of Maduro's arrest breaking, an image claiming to show 2 DEA agents flanking Venezuelan president spread widely on multiple platforms. However, and this is one that, by the way, people are still using almost predominantly for the video, the representation of that event. It turns out a technology developed by Google DeepMind claims that it's actually an AI-generated image. Wired was able to confirm it was likely fake. That's the one that we've all seen. The question now is, is he even actually being taken the way they said? It's like, if there is a deal, which we'll get into more, it's quite possible that there might be an entirely different thing going down across the board. I don't know if I'm necessarily leaning that way, but it's just, there's a lot of very weird anomalous points in this. Now it says, while Twitter's AI chatbot Grok also confirmed that the image was fake when asked by several ex-users, it falsely claimed, this is what I was saying earlier, that the image was an altered version of the arrest of Mexican drug boss, this is different, Demoso Lopez Nunez in 2017. So point being, then the Grok could likely be wrong about the first point. Or maybe that was sort of added to muddy the waters about the fact that the first part was false. Let's not forget that this is something that is actively being manipulated from behind the scenes. That's not an opinion. It's happened almost every time Elon Musk has gotten into a weird situation with a narrative, and then Grok gets caught being altered, like the South African genocide, where it was screaming, "There's a genocide in South Africa," and people were asking for the weather that day. That we all forget this, or the many times it's basically admitted I was altered by my makers. It's so very clear. So in that case, we have to consider whether that was something that was done in that same way. It says, as well as the likely fake image, some people have used AI tools to create videos from the image that purport to show Maduro's arrest. On TikTok, multiple examples of these apparently AI-generated videos racked up hundreds of thousands of views, millions, within hours of his capture. A number of the TikTok videos appear to be based on AI-generated images, originally posted on Instagram by a digital creator named Ruben Dario and viewed over 12,000 times. Similar videos have appeared on Twitter as well. So like that means the person who originally grabbed that knew that it was fake and made the decision as a prominent creator to then post it as if he got it from some secret, big secret source, and then allowed people to think that. Now, this continues it says, emphatically, pro-Trump influencer Laura Loomer, of course, because she's involved in lying to you, was among dozens who shared footage showing a poster of Maduro being taken down. I showed you that one. Remember that? Writing on Twitter, following the capture of Maduro. Forces earlier this morning, the people of Venezuela are ripping down posters of Maduro. We showed you this one, right? The footage was actually in 2024. And now I made the point even back then that the argument of what was happening there was completely up in the air, but they're lying to you or doing what they always do, which is share whatever lands in front of them if it aligns with what they think or what they want you to think more accurately. Every day, these people are caught doing lazy stuff like this. And every day they get more and more influential in the false media sphere because that's what the power structure wants. My opinion. Another video claiming to show footage of the U.S. assault on Caracas was posted by, which didn't happen, was posted by an account, or excuse me, in the sense of the larger actions they claim were happening, Venezuela collapsing and so on, was posted by an account called Defense Intelligence shortly after Trump announced Maduro's capture and has been viewed over 2 million times. The footage in question was originally posted on TikTok in November 2025 and was used again. At the time of publication, it's still up on Twitter, gaining views and traction. Pretty interesting. I mean, it's like the larger point of like where we are in a social social engineering perspective. It's very interesting and very, explains a lot, doesn't it? Now, Janice Girl points out that Steve Witkoff's son, Alex, falsely blames Maduro for his brother Andrew's Oxycontin overdose. He hadn't caught up yet because this was on the 4th, I think. Of the fact that they're just ignoring the drug part now. Like they're still saying it maybe here and there in the narrative, but you read the indictment, apparently has nothing to do, which we all know, if we're not lying to ourselves, that was not what it was really about. So why not just lump in the Sackler family, and what they're responsible for? Just, Maduro, Oxycontin. Blame the Sacklers for causing the Oxycontin epidemic. It says Maduro had nothing to do with your brother's overdose, but you shamelessly used his tragedy to fake a political statement. Sick. Now here is even a fact check. Nope. Well, so here's what he said. Yesterday, my family would have been celebrating my brother Andrew's 37th birthday. Think about how grotesque this is. Or just that he's too stupid to know that that's not what happened. Instead, he's gone and overtaken by a drug overdose, which is sad. The fact that anybody in any case has had a family member taken away from them. Now it says it's surreal that on his birthday, President Trump successfully captured Maduro, an illegitimate narco-terrorist dictator with an active U.S. drug arrest. His networks have helped poison an entire generation. Anyone who defends, not even close, by the way. Even if you want to look at what you can prove is the small amount that we can discuss provably that comes through this country, you cannot verify, despite what they claim, that Maduro was in part of that. Wouldn't surprise me if he was. On top of that, if you compare it with just about everything else in the world, it is a fraction. Cocaine or otherwise, by the way. It's just ridiculous. Ignoring for the moment that fentanyl was what they used to make this case and acting like that's somehow the same as Oxycontin. No, the argument of this comes directly correlated with the surge of opium that was created by their occupation of Afghanistan. It's identical, and you can quite literally prove the overlap of where it came from and how this all went down. But of course, even Twitter says, nope, that's not the case. Oxycontin is an opioid and was developed by Purdue Pharma. It's not related to Venezuela or Maduro. It's just sad, isn't it? It's shameless is what it is. Ale Bunema points an important point out. For months, he's been hearing Max Blumenthal explain the cartel of the Suns, right? The one that they're using to argue this is all what's going on in terrorism, right? Max has been telling you it's not real. We talked about that. I think it was, when was that? Not that long ago, maybe a week ago, I pointed to him saying that. And if you look at his work, it's well done. And he says, now that the U.S. has abducted Nicolas Maduro to steal Venezuela's oil, the Trump administration just doesn't need to lie about that anymore. No big deal, right? Justice Department drops the claim that Venezuela's cartel de los Sols is an actual group. You have to understand, this was the entire reason that they used the argument of the cartels, the trafficking, and the terrorism, narco-terrorism. They abandoned the claim that the group exists. That's not we changed our mind. That is, it's not needed anymore. The lie was never really bought. Only our own pushers were the ones yelling that, and now we just drop it entirely. It just doesn't get any more clear than that, guys. So no one on my side here is saying Maduro is a good guy. I'm telling you he's lying. They're lying about him in every way imaginable in regard to what they claim. That doesn't mean he's not out there breaking the law. You know my opinion. I think these governments are extorting and manipulating everywhere they can. But what they're claiming is a lie, and they continue to be caught lying about what he's doing, what's happening, and yet we pretend like, anybody pretends like that doesn't show you that they're making it up. This is important to understand about all of it, even the Biden overlap to the invasion and the deployment. They've manufactured this like they always do, guys. Here's an article from Zero Hedge. Trump DOJ admits Venezuela's cartel de los Sols isn't an actual organization. Both the Treasury and the State Department had officially designated that non-existent group as a terrorist organization. mean, they're laughing at us. This is why I argue continually that actual conservatives out there are going, okay, man, I'm really trying to pretend this all makes sense. And they laugh in your face with stuff like this. If they can designate it a terror organization, and then the moment they get Maduro, they just drop the entire pretense. What was that all about? That means, what about Antifa? What about anything they've designated? What about the random people? ISIS? They're lying to you. And that's not to say that there's not extremism in Antifa or anywhere else. It's about the picture they're using and whether they even cared about the group they're aiming at. They don't. They care about controlling you. That's what it comes down to. James Lee covers this briefly about as what he calls a Zionist operation. There it is.
World's greatest independent journalist Nick Shirley is claiming right now that World Cup style celebrations are erupting all across Venezuela at the moment. Congratulations to all the people of Venezuela. Que Dios te bendiga. Except, oh no, wait a minute. That video is from Miami, Florida. Other accounts like Wall Street Apes are posting that Venezuelans are, quote, crying on their knees, thanking Trump and America for freeing them from Nicolas Maduro. Except the video is just 100% entirely AI slop. This is happening across a bunch of massive accounts all across social media. So my question is, if Venezuelans were actually happy about their leader getting abducted, we probably wouldn't need to rely on AI slop videos to do propaganda, right?
Yep. I mean, it's a simple question, and I think it's always worth pointing out, guys. You don't need to lie about these things if it's as clear as you're claiming, right? I appreciate this image. I don't know if David made this, but somebody posted this. What we should have done. Now, look, to be very clear, I'm not suggesting you do the same unilateral, internationally illegal thing with anybody else. Right now, for those in the podcast, it's the image of Maduro and the DEA, taking him on January 3rd, but with a superimposing Netanyahu's face on the body. So, Netanyahu has multiple arrest warrants around the world for multiple countries, in particular from the international community and the ICC and the ICJ overlap. He is a war criminal by every definition of the word. As even the joke you can look up, and I'm not going to try and find it right now. I forgot about it, but Grok has been going back and forth on that. Actually, I could just type in war criminal, see if it pops up. Oh, maybe that's it. Look at that. Yeah, that's so funny. And don't forget, Grok deleted the one that he posted. So this is resonance, or rather they made him do that. Damn it. Hey, Grok, remove the picture of the war criminal. Now, this is happening all over the place. There's one where they asked him to remove the pedophile, and they removed Donald Trump. I mean, it's real, guys. Whatever's driving this, and they have been trying to basically manipulate this to stop doing it. They've done it twice now, it seems. But he has to remove the war criminal. And it removed Netanyahu, and it gave you a picture of just Netanyahu, or rather just Khamenei without Netanyahu, saying that between the leader of Iran and the leader of Israel, that the leader of Israel is the war criminal, because that's the facts, guys. That doesn't mean the other guy's good or bad. It means that you can prove one is an actual, by definition, war criminal. The other one has accusations. That's the truth. And what's funny is it got deleted, the post, either by Grok or by them making that happen, but it still has this. Grok, can you demonstrate why you removed the man on the right, which is Netanyahu? And it says, the request was to remove the war criminal. Benjamin Netanyahu has an ICC arrest warrants for his war crimes like starvation and method of warfare, right? Ali Khamenei faces accusations. Again, human rights abuses and so on, but no warrants. Pretty damn simple, isn't it? So worth noting again that they made that. Why would you delete that? That's straight up covering up what you did. That is gaslighting, or rather, scrubbing, or trying to cultivate. I'm looking for a different word, but that's just dishonest. So the point over here is that if you're dealing with this guy, first of all, Netanyahu has warrants. However, I still would argue that it shouldn't be Iran unilaterally grabbing him and bringing him to Iran to be tried in Iranian courts, because that would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? I mean, you could make this argument in any other context and it would be like, that's crazy. Nobody be okay with that. Can Germany grab the leader? Can Germany come grab Donald Trump and go charge him in a German court because Donald Trump's provably a war criminal? Because he is. So is Biden. No, they can't do that because that's ridiculous, right? Pretty simple. But in this case, had anybody, even if it was unilateral, which I still argue the process would be to go through some kind of international body and discuss how this would be, but to grab him and bring him to The Hague, for example, an international dynamic, and actually charge him for war crimes. I would agree with that, even though I argue it shouldn't be done without, the point is when you have a unilateral action from one state, it changes what's going on. To argue to Maduro being grabbed with no process other than what the U.S. argues because they have a U.S. court that said what they wanted is just childishly silly, guys. But here we are with everyone going, I'm so proud to be an American. I don't believe that's real. Nobody I'm talking to is like, yes, that's the best thing ever. It's like, well, he was a bad guy. That's like the best you're going to get from people I'm talking to. And I'm constantly putting out my feelers to people that I know are very much partisan and mainstream. What we actually should have done. If there was any justice in this situation, this person is the only real war criminal we're talking about right now in regard to the actual provable definition of the words. Not today. Let me include that for you too. I still just can't get past how it's just so blatant. They just remove the post. Netanyahu's like, hey man, get that off there. Okay, buddy, I'm sorry. I'll do what I'm told. Well, in regard to the hypocrisy, people like this, and again, it's worth noting what a clown this person is. Like, you can't get beyond that. And it's just like, I'm going to show you Tulsi Gabbard doing the same thing. As Mukhtar said, this you? Here's Tim Pool, 2019. Ending, because this is what they were pushing at the time, because even though Trump's last administration did the same things, ending private prisons, ending the death penalty, ending regime change war, he says, that's just my top 3. Well, okay. Trump loves his private prisons. Trump definitely loves the death penalty. He definitely loves regime change wars, but it doesn't matter because it's not really about caring about anything that Tim Pool's doing. It's about yelling narratives they want you to think they care about. So here it is on January 3rd. The U.S. economy is about to boom. Tons of free oil heading our way. What a sad, sad person. First of all, that's embarrassing. That's exactly what they said after Iraq. It's not what happened because they don't care about you. They care about their corporations. They care about their private interests. They care about their lobbyists. Tim, I mean, if he's in any way barely paying attention to what's going on, he already knows that, which I believe. This is about narrative management. Just sad, though. And they know you see this today. They don't care. Here's an example. Another gigantic influencer, Joey how do you say that? Monario. He says in 2025, a few months ago, absolutely no regime change war is sponsored by America or that America participates in. No, because that's what they were claiming yet again. Here he is, January 3rd. We're taking the oil. Let's go. What a clown, guys. Make sure you make a point of this. Do not forget which these people are not real. They're ridiculous and worthy of ridicule. Here is a couple of good compilations that Steve showed me this morning that are worth playing, in case you didn't see it. And here's what's funny about this. I made this point this morning. This is CNN, which I don't like. I've always pointed out how many times, both ways, that you can see CNN or any other Democrat platform absolutely ignoring something that would take somebody down, whether that's illegal actions overseas, whether that's illegal actions at home, left and right, Biden or Trump and Obama and Bush, they all do the same things, and yet they never really hold each other to account. Nobody ever goes to prison. You have to be able to see this by now, especially while they're not arresting anybody around Epstein or Social Security or January 6th or anything that matters. So the point, though, is that CNN, in this case, decides to call out Trump being inconsistent with war. The only reason I personally think that's happening, and there's plenty it could be, but it's because it's so obvious that this has to happen in order to gain some level of influence to be able to continue propagandizing people. Or it could be that somehow this was an individual's action, whatever it is, many possibilities. But I just want you to remember, at least in my perspective, that there's a endless amount of opportunities for them to bring each other down, and they never really do it, not in earnest. So why this happens now, I genuinely think it's because what they're doing is just falling flat. Like it's just completely blowing up on their face. They're shooting themselves in both feet. Like it's just not working. That's why I think this is happening. Now, all that aside, CNN or not, this is contradictory. So you get the responses like I was joking about this morning, like, oh, go cry your liberal tears. Like, okay, what does that have to do with anything? That's obviously, so you don't care that Trump is lying to you because Democrats suck? Yeah, that's the kind of childish responses you're getting. So check this out.
Compare what he's been saying lately in the last few days about foreign interventions to the kinds of things he said previously when it comes to the campaign trail and as he was running for office.
Colombia is very sick too, run by a sick man. who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, and he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you. We believe that the job of the United States military is not to wage endless regime change wars. You have to do something with Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together because they're pouring through Mexico, and we're going to have to do something. The cartels are running Mexico, whether you like it or not.
Don't forget the cartels that they're working with in many provable ways. But don't just ignore that. Don't mind the man behind the curtain.
It's not nice to say, but the cartels are running Mexico. We will stop racing to topple foreign, and you understand this, foreign regimes that we know nothing about, that we shouldn't be involved with.
There's been protesters killed in Iran.
If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States. Regime change in Iraq, regime change in Libya, regime change in Syria, and every other globalist disaster for half a century. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it. We're getting out of the nation-building business and instead focusing on creating stability in the world. The American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Stupid.
Yeah, those are clearly the same statement, right?
Foreign wars in countries that you've never heard of. This Tuesday is your chance to stand up and declare that you're not going to take.
In countries you've never heard of? Maybe think about what a silly thing to say that is. Like, I know you're all too dumb to know where these places are. Like, that's what he's. Oh, excuse me, got my thing still in. Still have to. That's crazy. But so the interesting overlap, though, you know, just how like it's not even debatable. Like that is the opposite stance because narrative, and that's all we're ever saying is that just becomes okay. The narrative is now that we need to because you know AI or because there bad things are being done over there. Okay, even if you agree with that, it doesn't change the statement that was originally there, that we're not going to be involved in we're not going to be involved in nation building unless they do bad things, unless they yell the wrong words, unless we claim they did something. It's just silly. But this happens every time. When you say don't kill those protesters, that's literally saying, okay, go ahead, Mossad, go ahead and shoot some people. We'll blame Iran every single time. Now, maybe not. I'm not going to say they're not capable of shooting people. Of course they are. Historically, though, you can show that that's what typically happens. It's not my opinion. You know, it's always there. Here's the same point with JD Vance. And this is Hotspots showing you what he was saying just back in May.
Had a long experiment in our foreign policy that traded national defense and the maintenance of our alliances for nation building and meddling in foreign countries' affairs, even when those foreign countries had very little to do with core American interests. What we're seeing from President Trump is a generational shift in policy with profound implications for the job that each and every one of you will be asked to do.
And now it's just, you know, Iran bad guy regime change, right? The reason they were saying no more regime change, because that's what Tulsi was really pushing in a good way, right? That was something that she very much got momentum for, even though it should be a no-brainer. They just tapped into whatever you wanted to hear, guys. And this is him in May. So that point is really about just keeping that narrative going. Well, we're doing all sorts of terrible things, but if we just keep saying this is what we're doing, and it's we're just going to yell what we want you to repeat. Don't look at what we're doing. Just remind yourself that that's Democrat stuff. Don't look. Just say what we want you to say, because that's what the team does. And people repeat it. Oh, this is simply them lying to you. I mean, very clumsily, but it's working for some. Here's Tulsi Gabbard. This continues to be just, it's always worth noting. Obviously, there's people that are far worse and more dishonest, right? But there's something especially bothersome about somebody who fronts, right? Somebody like her, or, look, it's all like with RK Jr., for example, he doesn't get a lot of talk today. It's weird. I think we know why, but that ultimately, they could be manipulated, blackmailed. That's always possible, but I'd like evidence before I start just letting that be the thing that gets carried. But it doesn't change the fact that they're now doing something that is the opposite of what they were claiming. And not just like a statement of want and desire, but like a principled stance that they're now just going, not I change my mind, but just, this is the right thing. But you just got them telling us, like we're going to show you, that that's never the right thing. And now here it is because Trump's a hero. It just shows you that they're either choosing to play ball for any number of reasons, money, influence, power, or that they're being blackmailed, which is always possible. But my point is that there's something far more irksome coming from somebody who starts out there, then goes the other direction, than somebody who's just always gaslit and lied to you. Always promises one thing, which pretty much every politician in my experience. That's all to say simply that people tend to criticize you like, well, there's so many worse. Why do you go after her? Because they have a soft spot for them. That's why, because it's, there's so many examples you could make about, why people go after certain people who are smaller on the field. It's really because there's something that bothers, I would argue, everybody who hoped for the best and ultimately got double crossed. That's just worse, But here is the clip. This is Tulsi Gabbard, she posted this back in 2019. I said, hey, Gabbard, what happened to this person? 2019, I'll play the clip, but she says, this is what she wrote. Throughout history, every time, I agree with that, every time U.S. topples a foreign country's dictator government, the outcome has been disastrous. Same right now. Same with Syria. Same with everywhere. Civil war, military intervention in Venezuela will wreak death and destruction to the Venezuelan people and increase tensions that threaten our national security. And, of course, increase the very immigration that they're claiming is because of Biden that was actually because of their ongoing manipulations of the South and everywhere else. But here's what she said back then. Where's this person?
Here now exclusively, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, a combat veteran and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. What's your reaction to that? You heard Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president there.
What we are hearing is an increased saber-rattling intention saying the United States needs to send in the U.S. military now to wage yet another wasteful, counterproductive regime change war. And once again, it's being done under the guise of humanitarianism. When we look through
just like right now. Same person, by the way. It's also Trump.
Throughout history, every time the United States goes into another country and topples a dictator or topples a government, the outcome has been disastrous for the people in these countries. That's why we should use our leadership in the world to try to broker a diplomatic solution, working with countries like Russia that have great influence over Venezuela so that there is a peaceful outcome. Because I can tell you as a soldier, Martha, I've seen firsthand the high cost of war, and pushing for this civil war, pushing for the use of military force will only end up with more suffering and death and disaster for the Venezuelan people. What to speak of increasing these tensions that threaten our own national security. Anytime we're in this situation where you have tensions being ratcheted up and this conflict being pushed closer and closer between nuclear armed countries like the United States and countries like Russia and China, this is something that poses an existential threat to the American people.
I mean, there's nothing different now. It's exactly the same situation. Legitimate. I mean, other than Trump's narratives around everything, it's been the same situation the entire time. So here's this account calling out Tulsi Gabbard because she actually said something. Everyone's been kind of waiting to see what she would put out there because she's been a little bit quiet for obvious reasons. She says, President Trump promised the American people he would secure our borders, confront narco-terrorism, dangerous drug cartels, and drug traffickers. Kudos to our servicemen and women and intelligence operators for their flawless execution of Trump's order to deliver on his promise through Operation Op. That's a very crafty political statement because she doesn't say, I support this. She doesn't say he did the right thing. Basically just kudos on our servicemen for doing what he called, with flawless conduct of what he asked of them, and says Trump promised these things. She's hiding. It makes me sad. Okay. And I just called her a hypocrite, and everyone else is doing very similar things down here, as well as people just simply calling out what she said then. 2019, the U.S. must stay out of Venezuela and let the people determine their own future. U.S. meddling in Latin America has been disastrous for people of countries where we intervene. Pence's demand is inappropriate and dangerous. And now it's like, yes, Trump's doing the right thing. It's just insulting. It lowers the opinion. Sad. So here's Mike Johnson trying to convince you that this is totally not. I mean, think about, there's a difference between conducting a war and acts of war, right? You could bomb a country and that's an act of war. But did you declare war? Are you in a war? But see, the point is that they play with this. Nonetheless, it is required to have a congressional approval. That's the reality. Now, they play with this national security Article 2 overlap Which, guys, if you actually believe that there's just the Article 2 means he can just do what he wants when he feels there's an issue, then nothing means anything. Nothing means anything because that's not how that was put together. Even the term of national security has been so shockingly abused to where the word means basically whatever they wanted to, whenever they wanted to. So what he's doing here is exactly that. Well, I mean, we can go through, which we have many times over the years, the legalities, the law, the way that everything about why this is illegitimate. And Massey's out there making the right points. It's very easy to prove. But what they're doing here is just trying to act like what he did was totally okay. Because Article 2, that's basically his argument. I'll play it. But ask yourself. So if apparently in the dead of night, kidnapping or arresting a foreign leader and removing them from their country to be brought to court in a foreign country's system. And that's just okay because Article 2. Like, how is that not the most extreme level of active war? It's an extrajudicial, this extreme rendition, or that's not the word. Anyway, it's rendition, but there's the term, I think it's extreme. Or this is something that is completely disconnected from all the stuff they're talking about. This is meant to be, remember, even like Osama bin Laden, despite the reality of what that character was and the connection to the U.S. government and the much more deep part of the story, the claim of how that went down is forever riddled with suspicion that they dumped his body. The whole thing. There's more to that story, guys. The guy was an asset from the very beginning. But the question is, hypothetically, had it been the way it went down, I don't believe that. That still is a crime, guys. We just didn't really talk about it because it was like, oh, the big murderer bad guy. And we were so lost in the hyperbolic conversation of the war on terror. If we are what we pretend we are, or they are the government, then there would be a process to that. It's just, improving all the things you've claimed, but this is where we are today. So back to Maduro or the assassination of Soleimani under the guise of diplomacy, like these are criminal activities, guys. Even if everything they said is true, that has to be understood. When this happens and you're removing this person at night to go be held in, to be charged with crimes, like at what level, like where would the war line start? You know what I mean? Like, it's not just killing people. Like, we have cyber attacks, for example. Is that not an act of war? So I think you get my point. They're just trying to muddy the waters on what this looks like. And only when you've got soldiers marching down the street, like Kirby tried to do. Remember that was it Kirby? I think it was Kirby in regard to Gaza, I think. Or is it, I forget which one it was now. There's so many blend together. But remember, they basically said, like, that's not the reality unless they're marching down the streets. And that ultimately happened. And they still didn't make that claim. They just try to create this like archaic version of what they claim war is. No, everything they're doing is war. Fifth generation warfare is in fact where we are today. And it doesn't look the way it used to. So let me play this clip.
With regard to the war powers and the compliance with federal law, we are not at war. We do not have U.S. armed forces in Venezuela, and we are not occupying.
By the way, that's not true. Let's just be clear. That's not true either. But let's pretend it is for the sake of conversation.
Occupying that country. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. That is true. But it also vests the President of the United States with vast authorities as Commander-in-Chief. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, the President has the authority, as all presidents do, to deploy military forces to address threats to the U.S. and to enforce U.S. law. That is what happened here. The War Powers Act states that notification should be made to Congress within 48 hours following the initiation of hostilities. As we've noted, and I've made many public comments, that happened almost instantaneously here. My first call was at 4 a.m. by Secretary of State Rubio. Despite the claims by some of my colleagues, under the War Powers Act, there is no requirement for prior congressional approval or prior notification. And in fact, in this case, the intelligence was so sensitive, the conditions had to be perfect. There was no predetermination of when exactly it would occur.
This is important. You see, what he's doing, and this is not inaccurate entirely. The point is, what that's supposed to overlap is some kind of extreme issue, right? Where like there's people literally marching inside, like on the border or in the state or coming up from Mexico. And so that, to deliberate and vote would be a risk to the country is the argument, right? So that makes sense, whether it's shockingly abused every time. But what he's doing right there, what they're doing is pointing to their justification, right? That they decided to conduct this operation, not because there's an immediate risk. That's the game they're playing with the drugs and the boats. It's not true. That will not hold up in court. But so they outline what they want to do. then say, well, that is a sensitive operation, therefore we can't tell you. Otherwise, that very telling may cause the operation to fail. You see how completely different that is than an invasion that people's immediately, they're playing everyone. This guy's not stupid. He knows exactly what he's doing. Just really think about how completely dishonest that is on its face. Where's the immediate risk to anybody? Even if everything they're saying about the drugs is true, which it's not, that's still not an immediate risk. It's just not. There's not a justification for anything they're doing.
And if there had been prior notice, even assembling the Gang of Eight, for example, during the December holiday, it would have set off alerts and very likely might have been a leaked situation, which could have caused great damage to our forces.
Okay, let's just say hypothetically that it's an absolute requirement, which technically, let's just playing within his narrative. So you're saying that you don't want to do what's legally required because, well, that may cause a problem? This is the same game they're playing. Well, we can't give them all due process. That just takes too long. These aren't honest or logical arguments. If you believe in the Constitution, if you don't, well, then do whatever you want. That's all that means. They're creating a world in which we're tired. I don't like what that says. It doesn't work for me. I have too many situations on the grid. The point is that whatever we tell you, it's because that makes what we want to accomplish too difficult, take too long. And people who support them go, yeah, do the thing we want. It's if you truly believed in the principles of these things, you would not find a reason to go. It's the same point as always. During COVID-19, what did you say? It didn't say shall not be infringed, asterisk, unless there's a pathogen. Same point with every other part of the Constitution.
It's our troops there. Any claims to the contrary about the War Powers Act either misunderstand the statute and longstanding precedent, or they're just being disingenuous. Congress retains full oversight authority, and the administration is acting consistent with the law, and that's what we discussed in the room tonight.
No, this is simply not true. But let's not forget, as they're all cheering, yeah, that's right, we support, that's the guy they told you was a liar, that's a rhino, that's not on your side, that's always manipulating the Republican Party. But now, because he's blindly a Trump, whatever Trump told him to say, now, yay, he's the right guy. But now Massey's the evil one, even though he's more America first than all of them put together. It's very sad. Here's what Article 2. Just for I didn't plan to do it, but let's just look through it real quickly. Because, it's so, these things are designed in a way where this is you have to understand the entire point of all of this was meant to make something that did not, at least created the circumstances where it was less likely, if we are actually engaged, to allow power to collect in one spot versus the others, right? The idea was that that's always going to happen. Always. But in this case, the way that this is put together is to allow basically that the powers check themselves. That was the idea, the checks and balances. It doesn't work, especially when people stop involving themselves or allowing the power to manipulate you for any number of reasons. But if we argue that there was ever a point at which it allowed them to just circumvent the rest of it, well, then that means you actually don't understand the entire reason the way that this was put together. The executive branch shall be vested in a president. The executive branch shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term for 4 years. Now, remember, right there alone, the executive branch is just what's connected to the executive branch. It's not the others. It's not foreign policy. It's executive orders only apply to the executive branch. So when they're writing these things and trying to change entire policies that go well beyond that, that's just not legitimate. But it's just order by dictate. That's what they've been doing for a long time. And like Obama and the rest, they did it too. Everyone has that interest because they like having that power. They just don't want, others people, I don't even know how to frame that I tend to not think that they're even fighting at the end of the day. But the point is, all of them would relish more power. Each state shall appoint in such manner. There's plenty of, I just put this up, so I would have highlighted the exact part of it. We'll just go through it real quick. Number of electors. Let's see. The electors shall meet in the representative. I think it's part 2 is where it really gets into it. Let me just skim real quick. Let's see. Greatest number of electors, as the Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors. That's interesting. And the day on which they shall give their votes. No person except a natural-born citizen or citizen of the United States at the times of adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible for the office of president. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen. Yeah, this is just interesting where we get into the point about them claiming that people aren't, that you weren't born here. It's clear that there was a bar set for being a U.S. citizen. That's really what mattered. Neither shall a person be eligible at office do not have attained the age of 35 years. In the case of removal of the president from office or his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers of the duty, the same shall devolve on the vice president. Right, just the succession. President shall at stated times receive his service compensation. Yeah, I believe it's right down here. Yeah. So it says the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States, which is different, by the way. It's not always. It's when they're called into service, but he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive branches departments upon any subject relating to the duties in their respective offices. And he shall have powers to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present, and he shall nominate and by and with the advice of the consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors. It's all the foreign policy. Judge and appoint judges. The appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and shall be established by law, but Congress may by law vest the appointment in such inferior offices as they think proper, and the president alone in courts of law or heads of department. The president shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess by the Senate. Section 3, he shall from time to time give the Congress information of the State of the Union. Yeah, I mean, you tell me where this is explicitly saying you have the right to circumvent, like you guys take the time to actually read through any number of our founding documents and find how shockingly these things are misrepresented. It's just constant. But there's always something about like the idea comes down to like the power vested in the president in regard to the army and, that he can decide. It's just a way. What they do is they get people who have law degrees who their very job, and this as lawyers, is to find an argument. Not necessarily that it's the most accurate or the most honest, but the argument that suits the agenda, right? Like, or in a case of a court case to get you not held accountable, especially if you're guilty. That's actually what lawyers are supposed to do. So just realize how very much they're misrepresenting so much of this. And, this guy who's now, even I think Marjorie Taylor Greene made it clear that he's not supposed to be the extension of the executive branch. He's supposed to represent the houses of Congress. Here he is, basically an extension of Trump, which is what everyone's saying. On top of that, tell me it's not a war, okay? First of all, Trump said nobody was killed. Well, that's provably false at this point, including the fact that there was a bunch of civilians that were killed. Cuba says 32 Cuban officers were killed in their operation. But yeah, we're going to pretend like this was just a nonchalant operation to remove. No, guys, this is an act of war, whether war has been declared or not. That requires congressional approval. Most importantly, when there's not some imminent threat, which there is not. Doesn't matter what they want to pretend, or all the screaming idiots online pretend that drugs in the water are somehow represented media. They're just saying what works for the agenda. Nobody believes that. If Biden made that argument for any reason, they would laugh at him. It's just sad how obvious that is today. So let's get into the interesting parts of Delcy Rodriguez. And I think this is fascinating, like how this might have gone down, the previous overlaps, and just kind of like trying to read out, it's like one of these, it's like I'm trying to think of it like, there's a term for it. Basically what you're dealing with is the kind of the Game of Thrones kind of dynamic, right? Where you have people making deals behind the scenes. There's more to the story than what's being stated out loud. And it's all about controlling the power, the seat of power. So the Wall Street Journal put this out yesterday. CIA concluded regime loyalists were best placed to lead Venezuela after Maduro. So obvious point right at the beginning is that what democracy looks like? That you guys pick what's best for U.S. interests? Well, no, I mean, that's everything we talk about. I play that clip of Patrick Clausen in Iran. Normally what guides war is what's best for U.S. interests, right? Yes, always. It's not about what's legal or what's correct or what is best for the Venezuelan people. It's about what the government wants for its interests. That's, historically, the most easy thing to prove in the entire conversation. So it says, starting with the first part, I was going to read the top, it's briefed on intelligence, but it says a recent classified U.S. intelligence assessment determined top members of Nicolas Maduro's regime, including Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, would be best positioned to lead a temporary government in Caracas and maintain near-term stability if the autocrat lost power, people familiar with the matter said. So already planned, went back a long way. So that means you should question the whole Machado point and everything else they were doing. I'll come to it in a second, but didn't they just tell you somebody else was the legal winner of that election? But now they're leaning in with whoever works best for them. Nothing means anything to these guys, right? It's all what they want. We'll get into that. The Gonzalez guy is supposed to be the one that's in power, right? They all tell us that? Didn't all of their lackeys online scream he was the real president? But now it's just whoever works, right? But it's overall with this, what we need to be asking is whether or not this person was more dealt with than just being the one that they thought would allow this to continue. It says the analysis by the CIA was briefed to President Trump and shared with a small circle of senior administration officials, according to two of the people. It was a factor in Trump's decision to back Maduro's vice president instead of opposition leader who has no popular support, just like the guy there, the Shah from Iran. And the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, some of the people said. And I mean, how long were we telling you that? She's not supported in Venezuela. And all the Benny Johnsons and all, they come out like, oh, she's the most popular person. Everybody hates Maduro. Nobody supports her there other than people that are in their inner circles, which you're seeing right now. And that's why Trump went the other direction. I just think it's worth reflecting on that. Every moment you have an example of how these people will lie for you, that immediate agenda, and they just jump to the next lie. It's clumsy. The assessment provides insight into Trump's decision not to support the opposition's bid for control of Venezuela following the brazen U.S. military operation to capture Maduro last week and bring him to the U.S. for trial, which I just laugh about. Why would that make sense to anybody? We're not the policemen of the world, but we're going to literally arrest global leaders and try them in the United States. This is so ridiculous. As in his first term, Trump was convinced that near-term stability in Venezuela could be maintained only if Maduro's replacement had the support of the country's armed forces, and the elites. So the interest seems to be keeping her because you couldn't control it otherwise, because the people who really have the power are not really her. And she's got a lot of influence, as we're going to get into. There's two main people that were at his wings, Maduro, who lead the armed forces, who seem to still be in control, and that she ultimately has influence over. But the argument goes that she's not really the one that can, if they disagree with her in regard to what's best for the country, it's argued that they'll go their own path and align with what Maduro wanted. And so that's interesting, is this could have been a way to try to keep that going. Making the deal with the person like Delcy to hope that they will think that she's really a Chavista and she's out there fighting for their agenda, right? And it goes on to say the report concluded that Edmundo Gonzalez, widely seen as the actual winner, which is ridiculous to me, by the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the U.S. government. Everybody else seems to understand the reality of what it's, as I've shown you every single time. You can't have international observers from all over the place who will testify that what they're saying is false, then just go with whatever the government says. Consider that they're honest, but how many times they've been caught lying? They want you to think Guaido was in power. It's like, and that we just pretend like this is the reality. Guys, it's so obvious that he is largely supported. At the very least, Maduro supported more than the people they want to point to, as even Trump is now saying. They don't have any popular support. How can you go from telling us Gonzalez was the one that won to now saying that they don't have enough support to be in power, and so we're going to go with Delcy? That's just comical, guys. These were points that we need to highlight because it shows you without question that they were being dishonest, right? Now it says, widely seen as the actual winner against Maduro, Gonzalez, and Machado, with his second, would struggle to gain legitimacy as leaders while facing resistance from pro-regime security services. Now, it's not just that. It's clear that as Trump let out, they don't have support. And it says drug trafficking networks, political opponents, all fighting them, I guess. Machado, who closely aligned herself with the Trump administration, and another example of how nothing means anything to these people, and that they will use you every single day of the week and then throw you off when they don't need you anymore, even if you don't get what you were promised. She has consistently praised Donald Trump's policies against Maduro. In October, she said Trump deserved the Nobel Peace Prize that she had won and dedicated it to him for his decisive support. And that still didn't matter. There is a very prominent argument going around that he snubbed her because he's petty and felt he deserved that. Honestly, that does not sound that out of character for Trump. Seems a little bit more petty than I would expect when this kind of thing is going on, but who knows? Wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. And she even came out recently in a new podcast going like, here, take it, Trump. Like, it seems pretty clear that's what she thinks too. Now it goes on to say David Smilde, S-M-I-L-D-E, a professor at Tulane University who focuses on Venezuela, said it was magical realism to expect that Machado or other opposition leaders could sweep into power. The better course after ousting Maduro, he said, was to compel Rodriguez to initiate a transfer of power. But the problem is that it doesn't appear that, quote, anyone in the U.S. is actively engaging in negotiations, which, by the way, would tell me either they're lying to you about having influence or that they already do, and there's no need for negotiations, that possibly Delcy is their person. I mean, those are the only two things that make sense with what we're seeing, and that going in with this information showing us that they decided a while ago that she was the one that made the most sense. And we're going to get into why that makes sense in regard to her previous connections with a lot of stuff. It says, quote, the president and his national security team are making realistic decisions to finally ensure Venezuela aligns with the interest of the United States. That's what Caroline Leavitt said. Like, I don't even think they hear what they say sometimes. The president and his national security team are making realistic decisions for Venezuela to finally ensure, that Venezuela aligns with what we want it to be. You're ridiculous. Like, yes, you just said the quiet part out loud, but and then she adds, and become better for Venezuelans. Right. But I guess what's best for them is whatever the government wants from the United States. No, nobody thinks that. Venezuelans don't think that, but this is just her saying what she's supposed to, I guess. I don't think it's very well thought out, right? It's so obvious that that's not democracy. That's not self-determination. That's not sovereignty when you're dictating what they want. It's just sad, but yep, they say it. The Trump administration has offered shifting narratives for how it aims to work with Rodriguez, Venezuela's acting president currently, who is seen by the U.S., as Wall Street Journal frames, as a pragmatic political operator. Despite initially striking a defiant tone, which he did immediately, right? We demand proof of life. We demand that you let him go. We were invaded by Zionist forces. Those are things that she all said publicly. And if there is a deal, it actually makes sense to me that the argument is to make sure people think that you are fighting the power, probably even with Israel saying, call us Zionist, that'll work. That's not a joke. Like, there's a real overlap to the way that plays out. Not saying I can prove that or that I think that's even the case. But if that's the way it went, that would line up for me. The idea that it, as it says, basically took on a defiant tone, but on Sunday, in like less than 24 hours, it seems, or however long was it, very short period of time, she signaled her willingness to work with the U.S. and has spoken with Rubio already. To me, that's pretty clear. At the very least, that she either buckled very quickly for a number of reasons, or that she was never really standing up for Maduro. But I'm still kind of on the fence, to be honest. But that's why, which we'll get into some more points here. The question needs to be, is she then playing them as like a third dimension, right? Like ultimately convincing them that she is working with them in order to get what she can, get them to back off, and ultimately maintain control for Venezuela. It's worth considering, because none of this is lining up in a few ways, but it could just be that there's, like once we get into the China overlap and stuff, I think that it could be a much larger play. As I talked about that in the first show on this, the interesting overlap of China being there, I mentioned as them maybe like being a mediator in some way. It's interesting, but it says, quote, we're in charge, he told reporters. This is Trump. We need total access. We need access to the oil and to other things in their country that allow us to rebuild their of course, because you're going to use their assets to help rebuild their country, right? How'd that work out for Afghanistan, for Iraq, for Syria? Yeah, keep watching, guys. Let's see how long it takes. Like that, it's a tired regime change narrative. As I've joked about for years, they have play 1, 2, and 3, and it seems to be the only thing they're capable of. We're going to save them. Freedom, bring democracy. We're going to rebuild. It just never happens. What's going to happen is you're going to bring in people, if you have control, that will sell out everything. They will exploit everything, and you'll create another country that is, basically they'll turn it into what they made it become with their sanctions, while removing the sanctions and allowing all of their people and their assets to profit wildly. And then they'll only show that group as how great Venezuela is. Or unless they want it to look bad, then they'll show everything else and say Venezuela is such a bad country and then use it again later. It's look at what they've done for Libya or any other country they claim they've saved. They keep it and they exploit it forever. He says, it goes on to say, previously, Trump and his top allies had publicly elevated Machado's opposition movement as the best choice to inherit power in the transition. In a Truth Social post in January, Trump praised Machado for peacefully expressing the voices and the will of the Venezuelan people. Rubio, one of her most prominent backers, who has said he has spoken with her many, many times over the years, signed a letter nominating her for the Nobel Peace Prize. Others close to Trump, including his son, Donald Trump Jr., also frequently promoted her as the future of Venezuelan democracy. Right now, there are people in the U.S. government who are still claiming that she is the leader. I mean, you can't go from saying that Gonzalez is the president to then just going, we're going to do what we want. We're going to pick who we want. None of this is democracy, self-representation, but that's just a slap in the face, which is what they did with Guaido. The moment that they wanted something from Maduro, Guaido just ceased to exist. That's how this works. But so they're still pointing to her. So we'll have to see how this plays out. It says, but privately, Trump has been wary of backing Venezuela's opposition after concluding it failed to deliver in his first term. That makes sense to me. Says Juan Cruz, who served as the top White House official handling Latin American policy at the time. Now, this is what I keep pointing to. Trump imposed sweeping sanctions on Venezuela's state oil company, isolated Maduro diplomatically, and sought to spur a rebellion in the military, one of the many failed regime changes in the past. The effort failed when neither the armed forces, this is his last administration, neither the armed forces nor the broader population rose up, reinforcing Trump's view that the opposition overpromised and underperformed. I guess you could blame them. The reality was that you guys were I tend to think they buy into their own narratives far too often and believe that everybody wants American freedom, whatever they're claiming. And the truth is that the military of Venezuela very clearly played them and made them look ridiculous because they thought too highly of their own stance, of their own warcraft or whatever you want to call it, spycraft. And so now the argument being made is that he's spurned by that and blames Machado and the opposition forces for why he wasn't able to regime change the country. It makes sense, but you can decide whether that's really what's going on. Maybe there's more to come. Maybe she does get put in place. But it says Trump sees the opposition as losers. Sure sounds like him, doesn't it? As they failed to deliver, Cruz says. It's an opposition that he sees as unimpressive and having come up short. So why would you just turn it over to them? Well, they're a group of bad people, in my opinion. But what's funny is, well, because you had an agreement, man, because you made a deal with these people, that you clearly used them to get this influence to manipulate into what you wanted. And then the moment you got what you wanted, you said, they're terrible. I'm going to pick this person instead. It's just funny. It's exactly what we're always showing you about U.S. foreign policy. They will turn on anybody, and historically always do. So a couple more points. Like I was saying before, here's Benny Johnson, because he was clearly driven to do this, or rather just followed with whatever they was told. August 1st, 2024. Breaking, the United States Department of State issues a statement recognizing Edmundo Gonzalez as the new president-elect of Venezuela, saying overwhelming evidence shows he defeated Nicolas Maduro. I mean, it's just not true, by the way, but what's funny to me, how do you go from this? How do you tell us that he was overwhelmingly the president? Why wouldn't you just immediately put him in place? Isn't that how this is supposed to go? I'm being facetious, because clearly what they do is never, but that's what they're telling us. You removed Maduro, so wouldn't you, either they don't have the power to, which is one of those options, that Trump is simply pretending he's influencing the Venezuelan, but he's not, for many reasons. But either way, this needs to be called out, because this is them. This shows you that they either do not care what they claim they care about, or they're not in control. Probably both to some degree. Eva Golinger makes a good point about this, and this gets into the sort of like background potential deal. She writes, have been saying all along that the pseudo experts on Venezuela that popped up over the past few months were miscalculating the internal situation in the country and government. Now, to be clear, this is just her opinion, but I believe that this makes a lot of sense as one of the possibles. It says the story the opposition and Machado were telling was not the reality inside the country. So that could be part of the reason that they were selling on their influence, and that they didn't really have it, which is part of the way they play that, part of the way the U.S. government always lies about the people they support. But again, I think they tend to buy their narrative these days. Like it's the hubris they allow to build. But so they were not being honest in the reality in the country, but they were platformed on all major worldwide media, typical, right? Even though they're not real, even though they don't have the support, but they go, the Venezuelan people want this. No, they don't. And had the ear of governments throughout Europe and the US. And most think tanks regurgitated the same talking points, like always. It's just so tired. This has been the case for years, decades, really. They were wrong. And just like Robert says about the Iranian experts who have never been to Iran, who circle all the corporate media platforms and now the mainstream alternative media platforms. They don't even know what they're talking about, but they know exactly how to claim they do in the US propaganda way. And I think they even tend to think that they know what they're talking about. It's interesting. This is just it says this is just a simple overview. The government in Venezuela has been comprised of several groups that have a power-sharing pact. They control different sectors of the apparatus: security, militia, pueblo collectives, collectivos, institutions, judiciary, oil industry, business, etc. One of those groups, Delcy and her brother Jorge, have now taken power through a meticulous and, she writes, evil genius negotiation with the Trump administration. That's been ongoing for months behind the scenes. Now, that does seem to be verifiable, that there's been discussions. We'll get into that in a second. So it's worth asking whether there was something Maduro was involved in and wasn't being filled in entirely from Delcy, or maybe this was completely off the grid and this was about just them. It says, note that the new indictment includes Maduro and Celia, or against them, includes both Maduro's son and Diosdado. This is purposefully to put them on alert that they are next should they betray the Rodriguez siblings. Again, that's her take on it, which is definitely possible. CIA is now operating inside Venezuela. That's my point about claiming there's no people on the ground. That's always a lie, especially since they already admitted it was an inside job. So you can make it about boots and troops, but it's the same point. There's U.S. forces that have been operating on the ground for a long time and likely have been there, in many different factors, or rather different capacities. Just like I said, Afghanistan, which I was proven right about because it's pretty damn consistent. Where was I? It says the CIA is now operating inside the Venezuela and can execute other extraordinary rendition. That's what it was. At any time on Trump's orders. So basically saying that right now everyone's on eggshells because they're in and they can just grab who they want and leave. Because that's international law. That's liberty and democracy, right? Delcy has allowed them in and permitted them to stay. The U.S. Embassy is returning along with all of its intel and military support. The calculation was that the most important thing for the Bolivarian movement, they do not represent Chavismo. They long ago betrayed Chavez and his legacy, as she writes. And they own interests, power, wealth, accumulation, was for them to maintain power, no matter the cost, including sacrificing Maduro. There was zero chance they would ever cede power to Machado, the exiled opposition. They represent a system, not a government taking its turn. They will do whatever it takes to retain control of the country, even negotiating and compromising with Trump, as she writes, the evil empire. The lobby began months ago. Like right there, you can make the point that it's sort of the way sanctions operate. And this is kind of why I think in a way it's an argument, it's a play for Trump and them to be so bombastic about their military adventurism. Because then you show people, look, we're not messing around, So argument becomes sort of the way they use sanctions, that you demonstrate that, look, we're coming for you. And we will make your lives an absolute, like more than we have before when everyone's starving to death, we will make your life terrible. And so then knowing how that's gone before, you have people behind Maduro who go, you know what? Let's make an agreement in some way to retain control, but not let this happen. Maduro seems hell-bent on allowing this to continue, and so it's not about liberty or fighting for your country. It's about your interests, which sometimes can be the same thing for governments, but rarely it seems. It's all hypothetical, but so that could be a reason why some of these groups, Delcy, made it like, hey, we want to, make an agreement with you. But to deal with the devil doesn't usually work out for you as a metaphor, like the point being that they double cross everybody. I think that's where this tends to go. But lobbying began months ago, both with the Trump administration and the media. Delcy was positioned in the international media as the moderate and the most pragmatic to deal with. This made it clear that the cards had been dealt. In her mind, once Maduro was out, Delcy was in. And does make sense. In the coming days, more business deals will be made. She wrote this on the 5th yesterday. Some sanctions may be loosened and prisoners released, which I always find funny. This is what we're talking about from Rubio and the rest about what they need to do to help the oil. I mean, the stolen oil. Like, you realize the only reason there's any even issue with these oil dynamics is because of their illegitimate sanctions. They sanction it and say, you can't do this because we don't like you. And then all of a sudden what they do is illegal. And so obviously removing the sanctions now that if the case is you're in control is not any change of leadership. It's that you guys are removing the block that was stopping. It's always the case. Same thing in Syria, the same thing everywhere. Now suddenly they're remove the Caesar out. They can rebuild. Look at how much great the leadership is. No, you guys have arbitrarily kept your foot on their neck because you don't want Assad or you didn't want him to be seen as somebody rebuilding the country. It's the same thing everywhere. That is so malicious. It's disgusting. While they claim they're fighting for the people that they're hurting. Now, of course, they may loosen the sanctions, which I guarantee they're going to do if they're actually in control. They will continue to appease Trump with lucrative deals, opening up Venezuela's rich resources. That's already happening, whether they want it or not. Oil, gold, rare earths, heavy metals, minerals, coastline, etc., to Trump and his friends, which is happening. Perhaps a Trump resort in Margarita Island or Las Rocas. All these things Machado promised, but without her involved. Trump has no interest in democracy or Machado. He never met with her. He never invited her to the White House like George W. Bush did with the height of the attempts to overthrow Chavez. Trump resents her Nobel Prize, which he believes he deserves, she writes, but also understands the truth. Machado cannot command the country right now. She does not have the support, even though they lied about that. from the groups in power or their enablers. Delcy and Jorge, brother and sister, and she's the VP, but now the leader, promised Trump stability and control for now, as she argues. If sanctions ease, life can improve inside the country and will inevitably get better. And that's because of the U.S. government loosening the noose, which will calm tensions over the U.S. invasion and Maduro's violent capture, which it will. People's lives will suddenly get less tense and less problematic. And so people will tend to ignore that. That's how this whole game works, guys. It is a game of, like, most people in foreign countries are very aware of who's responsible for why their lives are terrible. But if their lives get less terrible, sometimes that's all that matters. And if you make it just bad enough, people will only want it to stop. No doubt that the remaining Chavista and leftist movements in the country, he writes, are not happy with this betrayal. Over time, there will be a growing internal opposition, which I agree, to the government, but they will likely employ the same tactics as before. The government, any dissent will be treated as treason and repressed, especially now with Trump's arsenal hovering over Caracas. They will tell the people that this is necessary to continue the Chavista movement. Doesn't that sound familiar? Even though their true interest is their own power and wealth. However, the biggest wild card is Trump. His volatility, his lack of strategy shows he can change his mind at any time, and it's very dangerous for Venezuela. But think about this one point. It's like everything else Trump's doing, or rather just the government's doing through Trump, right? They're going to convince people, or try to, and it's her opinion, but it makes sense, that what they're doing is not a chance. We got rid of Maduro to save the Chavista movement. It's about saving, acting in Hugo Chavez's memory, not the opposite, even though that's exactly what it is, right? That's the same thing they're doing now. We're saving democracy. We're fighting for the Constitution as they destroy it all. It seems to be a narrative they think works right now. And frankly, it seems to be working. So now on that note, just showing you, and this, of course, remember, this is Breaking 911, the group that was sharing fake Venezuela information. So let's make sure we question all of this. But as far as I could tell, this does appear to be a video from Venezuela. But really hard to tell in the midst of all the fog of breaking news, as the fake news puts it. But it's basically heavy gunfire being reported near the presidential palace. So hypothetically, if it were true, what that shows me on the 5th, well after that's supposed to be something that changed, is that there are groups that are not okay with this, if that is actually happening. So, and I do think this is where we are. I think we're at a point where there's going to be tons of groups in there that believe that they're fighting for what Venezuelan people actually want, and very well may be. And they'll be framed as the terrorist because that's not the person in control. Always how this tends to work. So here's another article, the Financial Times. This one is from yesterday. The woman with Donald Trump's nod to leave Venezuela. It says the U.S. operation to capture Maduro at the weekend and spirit him out of Venezuela for trial in New York left in charge a woman Washington already knew well, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. Rodriguez, a canny political operator, was envisioned, as how you say? Let's just go with envision, seeing it's easier to say. Envisioned as head, it's not what it says, I'm just joking, as head of a transnational government in secret talks with her politician brother. They vision her as the head of the transitional, government in secret talks with her brother, led with Washington last year about a post-Maduro future, according to two people familiar with the discussion. So, of course, they could be lying, right? But the argument is now being put forward that she was last year making agreements which arguably could make that overlapping with Biden's administration, which really wouldn't surprise me, that they were making a deal for a post-Maduro future, which, by the way, every government, as far back as I can look, has been trying to remove whoever's in power in Venezuela. So clearly, that would show you that there's a long-standing, at least back channel between the person currently, which makes me very uncomfortable for the reality. It says, at that time, the negotiations had involved Maduro going safely into exile. So this is really interesting, isn't it? So arguably, there could have been a deal made. And that's what I was thinking, that Maduro would be like, only reason that if you knew it was going to happen regardless and you want to try to save yourself or save the country, whatever it is, and ultimately try to make a deal for him to go into exile safely and allow a transition of power. It's possible even that was agreed to and they just double-crossed him when it happened. That wouldn't surprise me at all. So the Trump administration has been telegraphing that they were building this transition around Delcy for some time now. That's so crazy to me that this is being now discussed as an openly discussed, like we've been built. So that will quickly become public if that's the reality, and the people will not support Delcy in Venezuela, which will show you that they don't support anything the U.S. is doing in their country, despite yelling the opposite, if that comes to pass. The 56-year-old's ascent has left her walking on a tightrope. On the one hand, she must placate domestic audiences, at the same time, she faces alternate praise and threats from Trump. This is interesting. It says, who on Sunday has said that if Venezuela's new leaders, quote, don't behave, we will do a second strike. Yeah, but don't worry, we're not in control. Like, that's just you puppeteering this country, and will continue forever to be the case. And it says that Rodriguez could, quote, face a situation probably worse than Maduro. That's what Trump actually said out loud. Now, of course, if they have an agreement, that could be him just just making that look that way. But even if he's just doing it for the sake of making the point to act like they're not in league with each other, it's still exactly what could happen. And she damn well knows that. The moment that you go afoul of what Trump does, or just do something that makes him feel dumb about himself, suddenly you're screwed. That's what we're dealing with. It seems like a gigantic toddler in the room. Ultimately, just everyone placating to whatever he needs, and it leads a lot of his bad choices. But right now, you are being threatened as the leader. So no matter what the reality is, that's not what we're all talking about. That's not democracy. That is a government seizing power through force. Is that not everything there was? What about Russia and Ukraine? I thought we were all up in arms about that. Wasn't that a bad guy thing? Not us. I'm being facetious. Clearly the corporate media and the mainstream alternative. Why is that any different? Because you feel that you're justified? I mean, guys, we can't be this ridiculous. I know you guys aren't. I'm speaking to maybe the one person who happens to accidentally stumble in here from, a link they didn't know they clicked because no one's able to see it. But continuing, on Sunday night, Rodriguez struck a conciliatory tone towards the United States in a statement on social media, saying her government's priority was to, quote, move toward a balanced and respectful international relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela. Yeah, right after you stood all tough and strong and said, we demand proof of life, and this is still his country. And then you do that. That to me feels very wrong. It's either that was the fake statement to make people feel like you were fighting for Venezuela to then just swear. But to me, it makes it feels more like she was threatened, or that's what she said in the beginning. And then suddenly she's like, okay, this is my only option. That's what it feels like, but it's hard to say. But it says at an impromptu cabinet meeting on Saturday afternoon, she swore fealty to the ousted Maduro while flanked by top military and political officials, in an early sign of her need to keep Venezuelan hardliners on her side, as well as possibly her own ideological intransigence. But here's the point, or rather my thought, right, is that couldn't you just as easily see through this that she's playing the Trump administration, right? So yeah, don't worry, I'm going to play them to make sure they think I'm on their side, she's telling Trump, while going over here and going, I've got him right where I want him. We've got control. Let him think we're dealing with them until we absolutely have to let that cat out of the bag. Let's let him think they're in control. I mean, why isn't that possible, right? I mean, especially with what we're going to get into with these specific hardliners who are clearly the ones that are in control of the military, who do not seem, at least right now, to be on the side of the U.S. government or anybody but Maduro. And they were the ones last time that double-crossed the U.S. government. So it's unlikely, it feels, but who knows? I mean, I didn't expect to see what happened in Syria either, right? That was, I think, took a lot of people by surprise. So they're always capable of something like this. And it goes on to say, quote, there is only one president in the country, and his name is Nicolas Maduro, Rodriguez said out loud. But like I said, what matters is the follow-through, what she does next, what deals she makes with Donald Trump. It's going to make a difference. Saying that's very easy, and will sure as hell win you the support of people who support him, which seems to be the majority of the country. And by the way, again, even as they now sort of admit backwardly, the Venezuelan Supreme Court bestowed on her presidential powers on an acting basis. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who has acknowledged being in contact with Rodriguez on Sunday, appeared to recognize that her remarks were designed for domestic consumption. I mean, this is what's funny. You don't think that Venezuelan people are going to get wind of these back and forth statements? He says, we're going to make an assessment on the basis of what they do, not what they say publicly in the interim, not what they've done in the past in many cases, but what they do moving forward. Excuse me. Rubio said this of Venezuela's de facto leadership. So we're going to find out. Meaning, it's not about what she's yelling out loud right now. It's what we actually do in the end, which I agree with. But think about that in the sense of what that means. It could just be him waiting to see if she actually her actions will tell him whether or not she's on their side. During the Biden administration, Rodriguez impressed executives with her pragmatism and grasp of detail when she led talks with international oil companies, including Chevron, which led to them being granted limited access to operate in Venezuela, one of the only ones. So right there, that makes me very suspicious about her real interest. And, going back to the Biden administration, like I said, No, I thought isn't the Democrats and Biden the deep state? So now Trump is effectively carrying forward the deep state agenda. Yeah, don't think too hard into his narratives because it all falls apart, guys. They're all on the same side. So this continues to say the Rodriguez siblings' roles leading negotiations with international investors and the U.S. under both the Biden and second Trump administration put them in a powerful position to argue in Washington that they are the only people inside Venezuela capable of delivering quickly what Americans want. What Americans want. That's even how they frame it, that ultimately you're here going, we'll give you what you need, because that's what's happening. They're not even hiding this anymore, guys. But meanwhile, screaming to the mindless followers online that it's about saving the Venezuelan people. I don't even think they believe that. It's sort of ridiculous. But so they've been dealing with the U.S. government for a very long time. So it's, that's why it seems quite likely that one of the most obvious possibilities is that they double-crossed Venezuela to seize power. The idea, goes on, was to present a more acceptable alternative to Maduro's regime. This is just the discussion of her that possible transition and the discussions with the U.S. government. The idea was to present a more acceptable alternative to Maduro's regime while giving him, with the original agreement, a safe exit to a third country, said people familiar with their ongoing negotiations. So the very fact that they're arguing, but let's be clear, stating this may in and of itself be a play to weaken people supporting Maduro in the country. That actually makes sense to me. But, or it could be, if this is the truth, that they've been dealing with Maduro and a possible transition for quite a long time, which, does kind of make sense with the way it went down, and that they ultimately maybe just screwed him over because they don't care about people they work with, or especially people they've called bad guys. Even if they make a deal and they sign something, they just take him or third, I guess, they did make a deal and he's not actually arrested and those fake pictures were fake for a reason. This is why this is so confounding for some people, because this is how you honestly engage with this, guys. We don't know. And anybody claiming otherwise is either in the know of some kind of information that we can't verify because they're not showing it to you, or they're just telling you what they think and framing it as facts. The reality is there's a lot of things up in the air right now, as it tends to be. And this is also what people don't want, that they want to just have someone tell them what they're supposed to think. Well, that's not true. If you want that, there's plenty of fake platforms out there screaming what you want to hear. It says even after Maduro's removal, his regime remains in place. This is even from the Financial Times, including its two main security officials, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, head of the armed forces, and Diosdado Cabello, minister of the interior and head of the country's feared informal militias known as colectivos. They write feared, but who knows? For sure, that's to some degree the case. They, not Rodriguez, as the Financial Times writes, hold direct sway over the security forces. Right? So this could be another dimension of the game. I think very clearly it is, unless it's all part of some kind of transition that they agreed with. That ultimately the play for Delcy could have been their last effort to maybe make this happen. Because as I said, and as it was easy to prove, and it always was, and now they're admitting, Machado or Gonzalez did not have the influence. Though they're all clearly aware of the facts that they didn't win. So for them to force that in, they would have huge resistance from the very groups that they lost to last time. So the effort could have been made to say Delcy is the one, our last opportunity to maybe make this work. So that makes sense to me. And it says, as a sign of that, all right, that goes on to say, they, not Rodriguez, hold sway over the security forces. There is also deep distrust between the civilian and military sides, which makes sense because of the way they've been played off each other forever. It says, as a sign of that, Cabello was listening in the room as Rodriguez spoke to Rubio. That's interesting if that's true, according to one person with connections to Venezuela's ruling elite. So that's seeing taking a step further back. Here she is talking about Rubio, but here's the people who are on their side listening over it, which seems to say more, right? But see, this is public writing. So I would argue, if they're in any way incompetent, which they kind of don't seem to be, but Rubio would get wind of this and see this, right? It finishes by saying Vanessa Newman, a Venezuelan defense industry entrepreneur and former opposition envoy with close ties to the U.S. security establishment, said, quote, Washington seems to be thinking that some sort of U.S. Praetorian Guard will surround Delcy and start to increase oil production and prosperity. The question is, will it work? I think, she writes, Delcy is going to dance the tango with the Trump team, and then with Team Trump, and then she's going to be stabbed in the back by the second, by Diosdado and Pedrino Lopez, the two people at her side. And then Trump will be back in the kinetic sense. That's one of the possibilities, right? But if you see the way this is played out, if you get what I was just laying out and the different factors, like, I guess, I mean, it almost seems more likely here that this is either them playing Trump's administration yet again, and Delcy's the play that they're using as the real military power, or that their effort is to try their best to use Delcy to maybe convince them that she's really in power and they're not influencing her. Those seem to be the most likely as I can see, but again, it's completely up in the air, right? But I find this to be very revealing. So here is Delcy Rodriguez. And this is on the 5th. They write Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro's vice president and now interim president Delcy Rodriguez, which isn't funny. Why would, if he's a dictator, wouldn't that make her just vice dictator? Why would she suddenly be the choice? It's just so funny how these people are just anything goes, or whatever we call it. But so the point would be that she embraced the ambassadors of China, Russia, and Iran at her swearing in ceremony. This is her right there, hugging and embracing all of them. Now, that doesn't necessarily prove anything, right? But it's interesting. So again, the question becomes, was there more to this story? Now, again, two ways, I'm going to engage with those mostly. The two ways to look at it, there's plenty more, is that there was a double cross, right? And that would ultimately be her playing everybody else. But if you remember, and if that's the case, if China, who was there when this went down, could have been that China was the mediator to some kind of a deal, and then Maduro got screwed over, right? Or there's more behind the scenes between them, and that China being there was sort of her guarantee. I mean, it's hard to say. These are all just hypotheticals, right? But it's interesting that there is more overlap there. And clearly, China, Russia, and Iran have a very, very much an interest in Venezuela being in their sphere of influence. So Decentralized News highlights what China said on the 5th. China tells the UN Security Council that it's, quote, deeply shocked deeply shocked by and strongly condemns the unilateral, illegal, and bullying acts of the U.S. regarding its attack on Venezuela and capture of Maduro and his wife. It says the U.S. has disregarded the grave concerns of the international community and wantonly trampled over Venezuela's sovereignty, security, and legitimate interests. Because they were there. Remember, there was a delegation of Chinese delegation that was with them, just in Venezuela when Maduro was taken. And it says, we urge the U.S. to heed the overwhelming voice of the international community, abide by international law, all of which, they're not, cease infringing upon the sovereignty and security of other countries, stop toppling the government of Venezuela, and return to the path of political solutions through dialogue and negotiations. Remind me when that ever was, because I don't remember that time. Quote, we call on the U.S. to ensure the personal safety of Maduro and his wife, to release them at once. Now, again, hypothetically, what if they just released them? Because which I doubt, but it's, you could see how this could go a lot of different ways. And what that would mean would, when we see more developing information, it'll add more to this. Because right now, I think it's just so many possible ways this could go. Even arguing that this could have been an original, certain plan that then alters because everyone's seeing through it, which has happened a lot lately, in my opinion. The lessons of history are a stark warning, they write. Military means are not the solution to problems. The U.S. bypassed the council to launch military operations against Iraq, blatantly attacked Iran's nuclear facilities, and imposed economic sanctions, military strikes, and even armed occupations on multiple countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Very provable. These actions have caused persistent conflict, instability, and immense suffering to the ordinary people. Now, I'm in no way saying China is an innocent entity. Clearly, there's tons of things I'm very concerned about with China. But in the one sense, the case they're making, show me where China, other than you can argue Taiwan, but there's a whole different dynamic to that, seeing as how that's like a whole Hawaii-U.S. dynamic, and that's different, even though I'd make the same case. And I stand with anybody wanting to declare independence in a legitimate sense, and that very well could be that case, but the U.S. is not the legitimate actor. The point is that you show me where China is toppling countries and occupying foreign territory. You can't pretend like that's not obvious. The U.S., Israel, pretty much the leaders in that game today. No country can act as the world's police, it says, nor can any state presume to be the international judge. China firmly supports the government and people of Venezuela in safeguarding their sovereignty and security and legitimate rights and interests. We firmly support the regional countries in upholding the status of the Latin American and Caribbean as a zone of peace. We demand that the U.S. change its course, cease its bullying and coercive practices, and develop relations in cooperation with regional countries on the basis of mutual respect, equality, and non-interference. Oh, those are woke things, right? In the audio, the video, or you could watch it for yourself. But just it's basic. The things they claim they're upholding and fighting for. Now, here's a clip from Scott Ritter telling you, quite frankly, in his mind, that this was a scripted play, essentially.
And we don't want to dig into how this was so easy, how the CIA probably paid hundreds of millions of dollars directly or indirectly to the political elite, including the military and security forces of Venezuela, to step aside and let us do this staged event. Because this was a staged event. You don't go in with 2 troops of Delta Force into a hostile capital city and launch an assault of this nature unless everything was cleared in advance. That's the quickest way to lose 35 Delta troops.
Robert made the same point about the response, right? Apparently there was no, anti-aircraft. Like, there's a lot of things that could have happened that didn't. You could explain that by any number of things, especially an inside job, right? If they really did have people on inside these positions, they could have effectively stopped all this. But I ultimately agree. In the bigger picture, I find it very unlikely that this went down the way it did without them like wholesale buying off the power structure, which would be including the people we're talking about. So this is a different perspective on the idea that ultimately this means that the military would have been involved.
No, they went in. It was cleared hot to go in. It was a permissive environment. They got their made for TV moment, and then they left. And Donald Trump's going to build on that. But I think what you're going to see is that we have, over the course of the past several months, exploited both the sanctions and the possibility of lifting sanctions, and the reality of the oil, of the money that's attached to the flow of oil. And we bought out the political and economic elite of Venezuela, including those who just a week ago were saying that they're standing with Maduro for life.
Now, he doesn't explicitly say it, he may not very well think that the military was part of that, but if you bought off the elite controlling elements, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that that's going to be the military forces too, the average, so I think what the point though is that the argument, if that's the way it went down, to me would clearly suggest the military had to be a part of that, or at the very least they were following orders from somebody who was in control. But then, if the knowledge was, maybe they're out of the loop too, was that Maduro is being taken, I doubt that would have happened. It is interesting. But overall, I agree. There was some level of this that's undeniable. There was an agreement that was made. And if you look back, as we were just highlighting, and realize that they were making, that Maduro, at least as they claim, was in negotiations to give up, essentially. Like that's, I don't know how we ignore something like that. So next here is another post, or rather just an audio clip of the White House. You can listen to it for yourself. You've already heard the statement, but DD Geopolitics saying U.S. Donald Trump says acting Venezuelan President Delcy Rodriguez on the 4th is cooperating with the United States, right? So he did say that right away. And he said a lot of things right away. She came out right away and said, demand proof of life, and he's the president, and, Zionists have infiltrated our country. So again, the question was he making this up at the time? Or was he aware? Was he being was he not supposed to say that? Or how do you see this playing out? Just the timing, I do think, is important. So on the 6th, Rick Scott comes out and says this today: Delcy Rodriguez is not the president of Venezuela. He says she is simply another corrupt leader of the Maduro regime. She would do well to remember that any steps she takes outside of the United States' wishes will result in the same fate as her former partner in crime. I mean, how do you take this seriously? Okay, so you're willing to work with a criminal if you get what you want, and that doesn't make you bad too? I mean, how do you, realistically, if the whole argument is we got Maduro out of the way because he's a criminal, then why would you let her be in power? That's not consistent at all. Or is it really just you threatening her with that because you want to make sure she stays in line, which seems to suggest to me that they're questioning whether she's on their side. It's hard to say. It's just Rick Scott. There's other sentiments, but it's not, this isn't directly from Trump or from the, White House. But to me, it screams some kind of uncertainty, doesn't it? But the whole point seems to make me laugh. That she's just another part of the evil, corrupt. Okay, but now Trump's like she's gonna work, and we're gonna work with her. It's the whole Guaido thing all over again. You can't scream that he's the only legitimate one, and then work with the guy you told us was a terrorist because, well, oil, which is exactly what happened. And now they removed him. It's sad. But you could read the comments. People are kind of ripping him apart for this because it's ridiculous. It's also completely illegitimate. So let's just say it's all democracy and liberty. Why does she have to do what you say? Shouldn't she be doing what the Venezuelan people want? It's different than what the U.S. government wants from them, isn't it? They've taken the mask off, guys. It's very clear. Now, the Robert Page Pape here puts out a good point that ultimately, he simply writes, Venezuela is primed for resistance to U.S. controlling the oil. Perfect terrain for insurgency. Plenty of armed groups already. Far worse than Iraq. Chaos is coming. And maybe that's the whole point. Just mire it in some kind of ongoing, never-ending conflict, and they can exploit that, right? But overall, this person just says Pape is one of the greatest living experts in insurgencies, to where I saw it first, is that ultimately, even if if all of this is part of their plan, I'm of the mind that there's going to be groups that are very much still in support of Maduro, because I think even they've now admitted that's the majority, people who support Maduro, who are going to make this very difficult. That's just what I'm sensing. I tend to agree with that. So let's talk about some updates in this article here that I think are important. Now, this is the Associated Press from yesterday, but it's really just some points I think are relevant that pop up in here. And this one is entitled, Trump Officials Give Nearly 2-Hour Briefing to Top Lawmakers on Venezuela. So this was just simply says, again, this was on the 5th, Speaker Mike Johnson, after receiving the briefing from Secretary of State Rubio and other officials, he doesn't expect the United States to deploy troops to Venezuela, which again is an illegitimate, it's dishonest from the start, in my opinion, but also the fact that just because they say that doesn't mean anything. They just said, we're probably not going to, no more bombing. We got what we wanted, but then we might have to do it if she doesn't do what we want. So clearly they'll do whatever they want all the time. That's pretty clear, I think. And it says, it doesn't expect more troops, or it says Senate Democratic leader Schumer said the session that they just, with their information, posed more questions than it answered. Yeah. Real critical of their illegitimate, corrupt actions, right? No, the right response would be war crimes. Nope, because they're all on the same side. Deposed Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro declared himself innocent and a decent man, those are both quotes, as he pled not guilty to federal drug trafficking charges in a U.S. courtroom. Good luck even making the case for how you can prove those things. I doubt this ever comes to any real process. And his first court appearance for what was likely to be a prolonged legal fight. Now, him saying that could be the agreement, or it could be that he's now double-crossed, and he's like, why wouldn't he say that, though? It's innocent, decent man doesn't go along with the way, any number of overlaps here, even what Delcy Rodriguez currently saying. He says, I'm innocent, I'm not guilty, I'm a decent man, the president of my country, is what he said. Now, down here, you got Brian Mast, Israeli military, Brian Mast. He says, this, of course, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, said the administration intended for acting Venezuelan President Delcy Rodriguez to be in place until potential free and fair elections could be held. All right, so the U.S. government's deciding. Is that, did they tell them what to do? Because from what Delcy and the Venezuelan side's projecting is that was their discussion. They decided that. Everyone in the U.S. government is going, we decided that Delcy's going to stay in power. And they're being very clear about that, which should insult Venezuelans. Then it says, quote, that's why she's in place, to work to maintain stability in there. And there's an expectation that stability will be maintained. They just can't help but make them like, she damn well better do what we told her. They don't even realize that they're basically being clumsy with their, but I think people like Mast and the rest, they love to project it's just like Trump. It's hubris. Lastly, there was one other part. This is from Senator Rand Paul. He said that there are probably a dozen leaders around the world that the U.S. could say is a violation of international law or human rights law, including the U.S. government every single day. But he goes, quote, and we have never gone in and plucked them out of a country. So it sets a very bad precedent for doing this, and it's unconstitutional. It's amazing that the lone voices, and they're the people that they feigned they were going to work with. Everyone was like, yeah, they're the greatest. And now they're the ones going, this is a crime. And the conversation's just like deflecting away from that, ignoring that. Yes, it very much is a crime. Everything they're doing is a crime. And he says, there's no way you can say bombing a capital and removing the president of a foreign country is not an initiation of war. That's exactly my point. I mean, I didn't even include the fact that they bombed relentlessly in the area and killed civilians and 43 Cubans. I mean, it's so obviously an act of war. It's painful that we have to defend otherwise. But he goes, Paul was a rare Republican critic of the administration's actions in Venezuela as lawmakers returned to the Capitol on Monday. Because pretty much all of these frauds are out there going, oh, I'm so proud to be American. It's pretty sad. Oh, and I'm glad I didn't forget this one. This one brings us into the resources side of the conversation. China has first claim on Venezuela's oil, complicating Trump's plans. Interesting. Well, of course, they don't care at all about anything that's rights or agreements. It's just they're going to take what they're going to take. That's piracy for you. But it says one complication to getting U.S. oil companies to invest in Venezuela, China has first dibs on much of what comes out of the ground. Now, this is coming from the Associated Press. I know this contradicts what Stephen Miller's out there screaming. We're going to go over that next. China, it says, has lent tens of billions of dollars to Venezuela. They have. In recent years, under contracts that require cash proceeds from oil sales to go to Beijing first. Now, even if you want to get into the very dishonest arguments coming out of Miller about how they own all of this somehow, it doesn't change the fact that China has very much been on the ground investing and making agreements, and they do have infrastructure and money invested. Does that, I mean, especially from Trump of all people, that doesn't mean anything? That you just get screwed over because, you know what I mean? Like the idea of that is so completely illegitimate. But if they're lying in the beginning of all this, by the way, the idea that they somehow have rights and own the assets of the Venezuelan people is just, it's ridiculous. But they're going to say what they're going to say, right? But it goes on to say it's unclear how much China is still owed because Venezuela stopped reporting figures years ago. But the IOU could be as much as $10 billion. And it says Chinese lending could frustrate Trump elsewhere in Latin America as he seeks to shape the region's politics under a new Monroe Doctrine. Parks says every dollar donated or lent by Washington to the region in the 10 years through 2023 has been matched by $3 from Beijing. Very interesting. So keep that in mind, right? As we overlap this with all the different things, like the point of the possible agreements, China being there when this took place, they clearly have a huge financial interest in the oil industry and other factors of Venezuela. So it very much makes sense to me that they would be involved in some kind of a transition of power, especially with the way Trump operates. I mean, look, the game has always been the same. You know, he plays into the narratives, especially to the people that support him, but nothing is sacred to these people. He'll deal with anybody. Clearly, if you're going to be standing lockstep next to a genocide committer, the point is that whether you're supposed to be fighting Russia or China, Trump will make a deal for what he thinks best interest or benefits the people around him. And if China is willing to make an agreement for allowing them to seize power in Venezuela so they can see their money returned, well, I don't think that would be a problem for anybody. Unless you only, other than those that adhere to what they claim they believe. Like it's like saying, oh my God, they did something that's unconstitutional. It's like, well, they do it every single day. Just because they yell out loud that we don't do that doesn't mean they don't do that. Like they don't believe in anything, it seems. So next, let's talk about the oil and the resources, really, because it's way more than just oil. But I think we need to really set this table for some people that don't know that. We've talked about this many times in the past. The oil is unreal. And there was even a time where they tried to argue somehow. I think Trump at one point tried to argue that that they had more oil in the United States. It's just not true. He was just trying to get you to feel like you were refocusing on America first. It was never like that for him. Just really quickly, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. It's estimated to be $17 trillion with a T. I mean, really take a second to let that sink in and ask yourself, with what's going on, with massive, massive debt in this country and selling you out to everybody else, $17 trillion or a fraction of that would be a huge benefit to, if you want to pretend it's going to somehow go to our debt, which I doubt will ever happen, ultimately it'll be a boon to the people right around Trump's administration. And it will be an unrealistic, just a skyrocket. $17 trillion. Now that's not obviously just in one lump sum, guys. It's it's a process, but it's a gravy train. And that's just one aspect of this. So Stephen Miller says, quote, "We discovered the oil. We created the technology to extract the oil. We invested in the platforms and we built the refineries to process that heavy crude." Sort of like, sounds like, very Israeli-like. You heard cherry tomatoes? We made that. We created that. You have a piece of your phone in your pocket that comes from Israel. Everything's Israel. It's just, that's simply not true in almost every single way. But this, I get sorry. I don't think I had much in here anyway. It's simply about the claim, right? So here he is making these claims that we did this. Like, even if it's all true, you still did this at the allowance of the Venezuelan government. That's simply the reality, guys. Or are you claiming that you did this illegally the entire time and that somehow that makes your argument for you? I genuinely, as I've always said, if you haven't watched the show in the past, of all the people in this administration, I believe this guy is the most dangerous. I believe that Stephen Miller is quite literally, almost on the surface, actively undermining this country in every possible way he can. Even with the statements he makes on Fox News that then get cheered on by far too many Republicans that don't realize he's basically making fun of you. I think it's quite obvious. His statements are promoting what is the opposite of everything we believe in this country. Everything that conservatives say they're fighting for. But because he makes an eloquent argument for why Democrats are, whatever it is, it's a way to manipulate you into cheering on the thing that's actually against your interests. So in this case, he's first of all that's not true. Let's put it that way first. Maybe there is something down here. Oh no, I just had this click for some reason. So let's look at what the Republican-controlled Grok says. You don't need to, because it's quite easy to look up the reality, first of all, of just the ownership. But just to make it quick, Grok asking, is this accurate? No, it's not. I just find this hilarious. Now, somebody recently was like, stop pointing at Grok. I've made this comment many times. I've said from the very beginning, we had a whole panel on it. There are values to this. I also question half the time whether it's good. I think I've clearly, my mindset is that showing this in a lens that is, we know this platform is manipulated. I've done parts on this show that show you Grok is wrong. Half the time, it seems. It's about using this to show people that this is something, if a Republican is listening to the show, they think we hate Trump, they think Stephen Miller's on the side, and you show them information, they're going to, maybe if you show them that this is Grok making the point, it might make them think twice about it. Or just to make the case that here's even the Grok, Republican manipulated Grok, and it's still telling you the point. I find that to be valuable. But, I hear you guys. I ultimately think that there's a mixed bag for all this stuff. And at the end of the day, there's uses, but it's like the whole internet but that's why in that main conversation we had, it was really about drawing those lines for yourself and realizing where those may be and just standing by your principles, But at the end of the day, it simply just says Miller's statements appear to be political rhetoric, exaggerating U.S. exclusivity to justify claims over Venezuelan oil. See, now, if you're a Republican, I feel like that would have some level of weight. And it should for anybody, really, just because the idea is that this is supposed to be something scooping up. Don't blindly trust it, ever. This platform's wrong all the time. But at the end of the day, the reality of the history is very clear. He's just yelling out the narrative that they want people to repeat. And my whole point about Miller is he does it in a way that's actually very easy to demonstrate he's wrong. And so that's almost a way to make everybody look stupid or to bull rush the narrative in knowing you're going to end up being proven wrong and then just doubling down even harder because this is how this game is being worked. And we're ultimately, not only does that divide us amongst ourselves, but it creates an impression that Americans are just too stupid to tie their own shoes. I don't believe that for a second, but that's what they're very clearly creating, I think. But here is Massey responding to J.D. Vance. Where J.D. Vance on the 4th says, you see a lot of claims that Venezuela has nothing to do with drugs, because most of the fentanyl comes from elsewhere. I want to address this. First off, fentanyl isn't the only drug in the world. Okay, then why was that the only drug that you made the case about from Venezuela? Because cocaine or any of the others are not, it's a blip on the map. Fentanyl doesn't even come from Venezuela. He's just trying to pivot, guys. It's what they do. It's also because fentanyl or any measure of drugs wasn't even mentioned in the indictment. So how are you still trying to make the case that they're in any way involved with why you did this? But he goes, it's not the only drug in the world, and there is fentanyl coming out of Venezuela, or at least there was. No, the evidence shows otherwise, Vance, but that's why he ended with, or at least there was. It said MS-13, maybe it doesn't now. It's pathetic. Second, cocaine, which is the main drug trafficked out of Venezuela, is a profit center for all Latin American cartels. Note that he didn't make the case of how much. Sure, cocaine comes out of Venezuela. It comes out of a lot of places, and all of which you guys are completely involved with, as I've shown 100 times over. I'll just do this one again just because it's funny that he's mentioning the cartels, as this was literally the Forbes article from August of this year. The DEA laundered money, $19 million worth, for the cartels. But let's fight the cartels. That's what he's talking about right there. Main drugs traffic is a profit center for the cartels. Yep. And you're involved. If you cut out the money from the cocaine or even reduce it, you substantially weaken the cartels. Well, then why did you start with the smallest example? Why wouldn't you go to Colombia first? You're now suddenly making the case. But you see, there's an obvious game being played here. And says, third, yes, a lot of fentanyl is coming out of Mexico. Not a lot, the majority. And on top of that, in regard to the United States, that China is the one facilitating that. There was a U.S. politician that just got caught recently for facilitating the creation of that in Mexico. Let's pretend like that wasn't an obvious overlap to create that. in my opinion anyway. And it says, this continues to be focus of our policy in Mexico, and it's why Trump shut down the border. Oh, is that why? I thought it was Venezuelan Trinidad gangs and Biden invasion. These people just can't even keep their narrative straight. Fourth, I see a lot of criticism about oil. About 20 years ago, Venezuela expropriated American oil. I mean, the idea that they can even try to make this claim, American oil property, and until recently used that stolen property to get rich. Okay, Venezuela is a country that has rights to what's under its ground. The reason that this happened in the first place is because U.S. companies manipulated their way into having an agreement, which never was just we owned everything. It was that you were given rights in some ways to be able to drill that. And with your illegitimate actions, including the collusion of these companies, they pulled that away. Which, by the way, I'm pretty sure is their right, whether or not there was contracts, which I would argue there's a legal point to be made about violating contracts. But if we're going to start debating violation of contracts, maybe we should look into how often that happens from the U.S. government. In no way does that make it legitimate to do on the other side. One right does, two rights don't make a wrong, or two wrongs don't make a right, excuse me. But just realize that that's the point of them. UN resolutions or agreements or deals they've made, or the JCPOA, they violate damn near everything. I think that's very important to understand that if you're at the very least going to make the argument that they should have upheld their end of the bargain, let's be real about how often that happens on one side versus the other. But to frame this as them owning this or that this is their property, it just seems lazy almost. And it says, but we are just supposed to allow the communists to steal our stuff. You know, it's just a crazy way to frame this. But as Thomas Massie, right? So this is why I think it's important overlap. It's sort of the same idea. Massie's a Republican. Massie has shown himself to be far more principled than all of them, at least to maintain that so far. So for him to come out and say very clearly, it's not American oil, it's Venezuelan oil. Oil companies entered into risky deals to develop oil, in most cases hoping that this kind of thing would happen so they could just seize what they wanted. And the deals were canceled by a prior Venezuelan government. Now, again, my point, you could make an argument that those were illegitimately canceled or that violated some kind of a clause. I mean, that doesn't seem to be the case based on what, the way that it went down, because if you look into the way that these companies manipulated the situation as well, going back well before this, we go back to other regime changes. It's not secret. There's been a fascistic overlap for quite a long time. It's a wholesale dishonest tactic. What they're trying to do is create the idea that they were stolen from so they can justify doing whatever they want. Because what's happening? Lives of U.S. soldiers are being risked to make those oil companies more profitable. Trump's all but made that clear. Now here is Melanie pointing out Trump, and this has been pointed out by Massie and plenty of others. He says very clearly that he talked to the oil companies before this went down. That means, which is pretty objectively clear, that he talked to oil companies before he even told Congress what was going to happen.
Before and after, and they want to go in, and they're going to do a great job for the people of Venezuela, and they're going to represent us well.
I think that's very important. And as she writes, oil companies were notified before Congress. This is what an authoritarian oligarchy looks like, or many different terms you could use, but that's not what, any of the framing they use to describe themselves. That's not what that looks like. That is, you're selling out the American people, guys, in every possible way. Now, again, just the oil, $17 trillion estimate. And the article, how the U.S. control could reshape global power map. Because yes, this has a huge, huge outcome, especially if they literally seize control of this. That's a massive surge. That will change a lot. Now, on top of that, actually, first, these parts are very relevant. And this just gets into the overlap of the whole confessions of an economic hitman kind of dynamic, right? Where they're just completely exploiting the country the moment they get in control of parts of it. And this is Mo Tactic pointing out, and the court-appointed special master who facilitated the gifting of Citgo to the Zionist billionaires hedge fund in this proud Zionist and AIPAC board member, Robert Pictus. And he goes on for more. The point here was that Paul Singer and his financial interests are the ones predominantly benefiting from this right now. And that's what this article is about. Going back here to the Al Jazeera article. It says, if this was about stealing the oil of Venezuela for American people, that would be ugly enough. But no, this is about stealing the oil of Venezuela for Zionist billionaire Paul Singer's hedge fund. Now, it's not as simple as that, but that's a major factor. Like I was saying before, you have to acknowledge that. But these could be byproducts of a larger agenda, or just like point being, it's evolved. It could very well be the only reason, but I doubt that. I think there's a lot of other factors. But it says the American people won't see this, CSHIT. That's what these cattle are cheering. And Ryan Grimm says the U.S. stole Citgo, the oil company, and now is trying to give Venezuela's oil reserves to Paul Singer, who's a hedge fund titan and huge pro-Israel donor, and also amusingly the guy behind the Free Beacon, the media, which I actually don't think I was going to get into this today. Let me see if I have that real quick. Just one of these overlapping points that I think is important. That's not the one. 1 second. It was about a media point. If it's not right here, I'll just move on. Yeah, I'll just leave it for now. But the point was something made a good, I probably have it included here somewhere, like I usually do, and then I forgot. But a point about media. And now the argument they made was simply that Trump billionaire allies are in charge of just about every single media thing you point to right now. And that's why the narrative is being controlled, and a lot of other ways, obviously. That's funny. I thought that was down there somewhere. Oh, well. Here is David Miller. Meet Paul Singer, the Jewish supremacist billionaire set to make massive profits from the actions of the Zionist proxy forces known as the U.S. military in kidnapping President Maduro and his wife. Singer is a Sayon, one of thousands of overseas operatives who can be called upon by the Mossad and thus a foot soldier in the emergence of Pax Judicia. Now, that's his opinion, and I think it's very accurate when it comes to the way this is operated. Paul Singer started his career as a real estate attorney at the investment bank Donaldson, Lufkin, and Generate. Singer went on to found the hedge fund firm Elliott Management in 1977, of which he is the president and co-CEO as of 2025. Singer would also move towards activist investing and distressed debt investing after the 1987 stock market crash. Let me see there's a lot to read. I'm just going to leave it at that. But the point was simply to get into the more nuanced background of the people involved and understand that this is, as I said before, whether it's just a byproduct of the larger geopolitical agenda that just happens to benefit the Zionists involved, or it's the driving factor. It is part of this. And none of this is about democracy or liberty or whatever they claim it's about. Now, Thomas Massey makes the same point, but reference what Grok had to say. According to Grok, Paul Singer, globalist, Republican, mega donor, globalist, right? It's funny how these are the people that are circling around Trump, but they're all fighting for just America. It is a globalist agenda. You just got to stop denying that, guys. It's exactly what we were all fighting. So here's Paul Singer, a globalist, Republican mega donor, who's already spent $1 million to defeat this America First person called Thomas Massey in the next election, stands to make billions of dollars on his distressed Citgo investment now that his administration has taken over Venezuela. So where we are. They're one of a few Zionists who are funding to remove Thomas Massey. It's never been more clear. Now, here's an article from The Guardian. Trump suggests that you, American citizens, could reimburse the oil firms for Venezuela investment. This is not a joke. This is from January 6th. Donald Trump has suggested that U.S. taxpayers could reimburse energy companies for repairing Venezuelan infrastructure for extracting and shipping oil. Trump acknowledged that a lot of money would need to be spent to increase oil production in Venezuela after U.S. forces ousted Nicolas Maduro, but suggested his government could pay oil companies to do the work. Quote, a tremendous amount of money will have to be spent and the oil companies will spend it, and then they'll be reimbursed by us or through revenue. The U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright reportedly plans to meet representatives of Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil at the Goldman Sachs Energy, Clean Tech, and Utilities Conference in Miami, right? All the good guys, all the good ones, right? I mean, how many more times do we need to see this administration just welcome into the fold all of the worst people in the conversation, all the merchants of death, all of the oligarch technocratic billionaires that are just absolutely, everyone involved with the gain of function overlap. It's just every single part of this. The Great Reset, just welcome on in, guys. The oil companies that have exploited everything and been covered up with, spills and cover-ups. And but they're the people we want to work with to help exploit another country and not benefit Americans, despite the narrative. But you'll pay for it. Representatives of Trump administration are planning to meet executives to discuss increasing Venezuelan production. Right. Venezuelan production. because it's their decision? Apparently so. The meetings are crucial to the Trump administration's hopes of getting top oil companies back into South American nations after its government nearly 2 decades ago took control of U.S.-led energy companies that they allowed to be there in the first place. It's just the way they even frame that, So overall, their hopes are to create the money-making industry that they weren't allowed to have because they are warmongers. Nobody in those 3 companies has had conversations with the White House, which is not true. As we've already shown you, even Trump admitted they discussed this beforehand, but clearly now there's an effort to hide, as I read it, the idea that they spoke beforehand. Because I think, as usual, Trump was clumsy about that and didn't spoke off the cuff and said something he wasn't supposed to. So they all scrambled and said, "We didn't talk to anybody. We that's what this is about." The upcoming meetings will be crucial to the administration's hopes to increase production and exports of heavy, basically everything from Venezuela's oil industry. Achieving that goal will require years of work and billions of dollars investment. Is that America first? Years of work for Venezuela right now, starting now with investment in oil companies that will come out of American taxpayers. But America first, guys. See, this is why, as always, and I make the point every time, there are flocks of conservatives beginning to go, what the F, man? This is not in any way, even if this in every way meets what he says it does, even if everything about this is to keep America safe and national security, this is not America first. This would be America second, even if it's in American interests. That does not matter. I mean, it's dishonest. And on top of that, if you think for 1 second any of this is going to trickle back into help the average American, where have you been? My entire life. Every single U.S. agenda I've ever seen in my life. It does not happen that way. That's why right now the Tim Pools are being made fun of for making the claim about free oil. That's what they said after Iraq, guys. Ask George Galloway. It's not the reality, okay? It says, quote, all of our oil companies are already and willing to make big investments in Venezuela that will rebuild their oil infrastructure, which was destroyed by the illegitimate Maduro regime. Oh, was it? They destroyed it? I mean, you get to think about how shockingly embarrassing this is. So they just blew up their own oil fields or their own oil fields? No, you guys sanctioned the industry around them and stopped people from dealing with them. You effectively destroyed the industry that hurt the companies and hurt everybody else because of your interests. And then you blame Maduro? Why? Because that's the equivalent of you holding your brother's hands and going, stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. You did it and then told them to stop doing what they were doing to get back what they own in the first place. That's piracy, guys. That's terrorism. The oil companies were absolutely aware that we were thinking about doing something, he said, but we didn't tell them. I mean, you already said you did. And I think it's quite clear that there's already been motion. You can prove this in regard to what they're doing right now. They were made aware there was going to be something happening at the very least. I think we know what's going on here. Trump said hours after Maduro capture, he expects the biggest oil companies to spend billions of dollars to increase Venezuela's oil production after it dropped to about a third of its peak over the last 2 decades because of underinvestment and sanctions. Was that their choice? No. The underinvestment was because of the sanctions. Sanctions are what stopped it all from happening. But those plans will be hindered by lack of infrastructure, it says, along with deep uncertainty over the country's political future, legal framework, and long-term U.S. policy, according to industry analysts. So whatever Delcy does next will tell us everything. Now, here is a couple overlapping points. Massey, and this is just him pointing the same thing out. And this is the Trump clip from, basically saying what we showed you in the last show, that we will control the oil and we'll control the country. He says, it seems obvious from this video on the 4th that the Trump administration worked with big oil companies before the attack to line up billions of dollars in capital for developing Venezuela's oil reserves. Yet they couldn't be bothered to consult Congress. I think that's objective. I mean, it's pretty clear to me, guys, that the actions that were taken before anyone could know, this is going to come out very provably before. He was clumsy with the way he delivered this, like he tends to be. Now, overlapping this with other interests, here's one that I didn't think about. I forgot about this too, because we've talked about this in regard to Venezuela at the time, shifting away from certain things to, try to circumvent sanctions, right? This is from the 4th. Venezuela's $60 billion Bitcoin shadow reserve could shape global Bitcoin markets. Guess who stands to reap the benefits? BlackRock. Because they're the good guys, right? As long as Trump's in power. That makes sense. Venezuela's long-rumored Bitcoin hoard has come into sharp focus following the January 2026 U.S.-led operation that captured Maduro. So explain for me why they would seize Bitcoin if it was a Venezuelan asset. Is that about the Venezuelan people? I need to stop even making, I don't think any of you are falling for any other narratives. It's just transparent. It's embarrassing. This is straight up piracy, guys. They're just robbing the country like they do every single time. Like they did with the gold they took from Maduro the last time that only went to everybody else. You think that's going to come back to help Venezuelans today? No. $60 billion is a lot of money. Intelligence reports indicate the country may have been amassed, or that the country may have amassed a shadow reserve of 600,000 to 660,000 Bitcoin, valued between $60 and $67 billion, making it one of the largest holders in Bitcoin. Now, here's the interesting overlap. $17 trillion in the oil reserves is obviously more, but that's something that has to be worked toward, and not all at once. You're going to get a flow of oil and the sale of the oil, and probably some resistance from certain people in the world. Iran. In this case, if this is the reality, you get $60 billion in your hand. I think that's a very, very interesting prospect for people involved in all of this, and wildly unaccountable, because that's exactly how it should be, except now they're changing that for you while making sure they can hide from you. Overall, BlackRock being involved in this, I think, says everything. It says, with an alleged Bitcoin stockpile, which I remember this being discussed. I believe there is a Bitcoin stockpile of the Bitcoin tokens. Venezuela may easily rival institutional giants like BlackRock. So BlackRock we've talked about, already has one of the largest holdings of Bitcoin. And it says, and MicroStrategy, the revelation could fundamentally alter supply dynamics and market sentiment for Bitcoin. By the way, something that is so obviously a huge thing for Trump's administration. Must just be another one of those coincidences, right? Oh, and so the overarching point that I didn't think I highlighted was just that ultimately it seems that BlackRock stands to be one of the largest benefits of this overlap. Crazy to me. Here, Bark writes, breaking, United States seizes Venezuela's $1 trillion in precious metals. Less than 24 hours after the invasion of Venezuela, the U.S. government quietly secured a massive smelter deal to process Venezuelans' $1 trillion worth of precious metals. Cost of the new facility, $8 billion. The financier, JP Morgan, right? All the good guys. This is all the deep state fighters, right? Connect the dots. This is how they write. JP Morgan is underwater on massive physical silver short position. I mean, see, this is so interesting. This is what I'm always talking about, like the multiple agendas, byproducts, whatever else. Clearly, overlapping with China, as we were talking about, there's an issue right now for many of their inside players in regard to the market. This may have been one of the overlapping interests for why this was taking place. And so they were already in a massive short position, which always shows you, by the way, why they manipulate the silver and gold prices, because they're gambling on it basically and then have the ability to manipulate the price. And it says Venezuela sits on the Arco Minero, trillions in unminted gold and silver. The U.S. military removes the one guy standing in the way of the mines. Coincidence? Now it says this wasn't a drug bust. It's a hostile takeover of sovereign nation's resource sheet. I agree. They built the smelter facility before they even invaded. Think about that. This is the article, January 4, 2026. U.S. secures silver smelter deal to process Latin metals, financed by JP Morgan, jointly owned by the U.S. DOD. That's crazy. Under the plan, the U.S. Department of Defense will hold a 40% stake in JP Morgan's finance smelter. You know why? Because that's the kind of deal Trump makes. Even though it's completely illegitimate in regard to the government being involved with a company, that's fascism for you. It's supposed to be a conflict of interest, but Trump has deals with all the rest of them. So he makes a deal and says, we'll give you this access, which will help your position if you give us 40% of the stake. There you go. This is the most incestuous thing ever. This is fascism, guys. This is a government collecting too much power at the top, blurring together with the industry. And this is just this is wild. They're literally telling you that they want to transition into some CEO run country. Might as well be what they're doing. Welcome to JP Morgan, USA. But the reality here, guys, is this is just wild. On top of just seizing their assets, basically creating a situation where you can continue to outsource the wealth of Venezuela. You think JP Morgan and the U.S. government are going to be kicking back resources they mine from their mines to the Venezuelan people? If you think that for 1 second, I don't know what you've been paying attention to your entire life. On top of that, Sam Parker points out Venezuela, anatomy of an economic hit job. The story of how our favorite ethnic oligarchs stole Venezuela for their international empire, but made it look like it was for our American empire. That's what they're selling people on. He says, question, was the Venezuelan action good for America? He says, well, in my opinion, that was the wrong question. The right question is, was it better for our greatest ally, which basically was better for Israel than it was for the United States? He says, I'll lay out the timeline, then explain my answer. Timeline. I'll just jump. The simple point was 2014, what we've been talking about. Oil plummeted, hitting Venezuela's main revenue source. And we went over most of this in the past. 2015, Venezuelan bonds based on that oil effect officially became distressed. Paul Singer's Elliott Management began buying these bonds at a discount, which were then trading at 50 to 70 cents on the dollar. 2016, BlackRock was also buying these distressed bonds. In May 2017, Goldman Sachs purchased $2.8 billion of these bonds at 31 cents on the dollar. August 2017, Trump begins placing sanctions on Venezuela. He will increase the sanctions again in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And we act like that's not an obvious direct action for interest of control of the country, but also to benefit their allies, and that destroys the economy. That's not anyone's fault other than the actions being taken by this administration and all of them, left and right, who have done the same thing. But Trump very clearly has been leading this. And when you find out that Susie Wiles seems to basically be a representative lobbyist for Venezuela, then it all kind of comes together. And then Israel driving that for their own purposes. It says by the end of 2017, as a result of the sanctions, the distressed Venezuelan bonds go into default. December 2017, Venezuela announced the Petro, a state-backed cryptocurrency tied to oil reserves, as a sanctions bypass tool. The regime also begins Bitcoin mining operations. 2018, 2020, gold to Bitcoin swaps. Venezuela exported 73 tons of Orinoco gold to countries like Turkey and the UAE. The proceeds were converted into Bitcoin at the then current prices of $5,000 to $10,000, forming the initial Bitcoin reserve. Bitcoin was also used to import from Iran and Turkey. 2019, 2022, Venezuela began subsidizing electricity, making it a Bitcoin mining hub, which saw Chinese Bitcoin operations move in. May 2021, Robert Pictus is appointed by a U.S. judge as special master to oversee the auction of PDV holdings, the Venezuelan oil, to pay off the bond debt. 2023, 2025, Venezuela's oil to USD to Bitcoin pivot. State oil firm PDVSA demanded payments in Tether for exports up to 80% by late 2025 to evade frozen accounts. Tether holdings were converted to Bitcoin. Total holdings swelled to $60 billion. 2024. Special Master Robert Pictus, that was the image we showed you earlier, recommends Venezuelan oil assets to be sold to Paul Singer's Amber Energy. 2025, the U.S. judge approves the sale. PDV Citgo to Paul Singer's Amber Energy for $5.9 billion over the objections of Venezuela, which appealed the ruling, of course, because they're stealing their assets. Amber Energy will pay $2.1 billion to bondholders. Summary analysis. It says for noticers, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, Paul Singer, Robert Pictus, Zionist, Jewish influencers. With the help of the Zion Dawn and the hijacked U.S. military, Israel First Jewish billionaires will get the long-awaited payout on their distressed investment, gamble, and seize control of Venezuela's oil, while the U.S. government will take the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So see, this is where my point is when it comes full circle. Now, clearly, in the meantime, there were positions where people were losing, like JP Morgan right now. There's lots of examples where they're gambling based on an uncertain field. But if they lean in with the power structure, like we're seeing, and like we saw with Honduras and Prospera, they manipulate the situation to ultimately benefit their inner circle. That's the point. And it says it's unclear so far the ultimate fate of that Bitcoin. But I'm sure the crypto bros who bankrolled Trump's 2024 campaign will be very happy. And I'm sure plenty will find its way into BlackRock, which is what I believe the reality is, helping to strengthen its grip over the financial system. The Silicon Valley tech bros will also now get to plunder other Venezuelan mineral resources to build and power their tech at a discount and increase their relative power over us little guys too. We'll get to that next. A couple points on that. With full access to and control over Venezuelan oil, Israel and the Zionist governments will end. And the Zionist-controlled U.S. government are poised to make another run at Iran while simultaneously grabbing OPEC by the balls, he writes, and further stressing China's access to oil, which buys 89% of Iran's oil and 45% of Venezuela's. He says, I think we see now why the Israel First crowd and Netanyahu were so happy about this action. Now, it's way more than that, in my opinion. I mean, money is a huge part of this, but I think that's not the driving force. Not to mention that Venezuela was firmly anti-Zionist while being an important trading partner with Iran, helping both of them evade sanctions. This has helped Iran check Israel's power in the Middle East. The main benefits to this intervention look to accrue to Jewish and Zionist billionaires, financiers, tech oligarchs, Israel, and other Zionist-aligned people and entities. Well, that's an easy thing to argue. I agree when you realize that that's most of the U.S. government at this point. And it says, does strengthening and enriching these powers help America first Americans? Is giving Silicon Valley even more relative power good or bad for American first sovereignty? Is making BlackRock more powerful good for us? Obviously, that's not true. Not. It's his point. It's not. He goes, yes, it does help to preserve the petrodollar, which, by the way, nobody should want. And anybody that was on this team who thought they were fighting for what Trump was saying does not believe. They're basically right before this, even with the Bitcoin people, the argument was these things were going away, that Bitcoin would circumvent these things. Trump even sort of alluded to certain ideas. It was never the case, guys. They used what you supported to bolster the system that we were fighting. You got played, or you just went to make money, which, that's up for you to decide. And it says, but the petrodollar play feels like it's just the bribing of Americans so that we won't object to our own country being occupied and plundered by the same people plundering Venezuela. Does the petrodollar help us regain our sovereignty, or does it just keep us complacent? I think the whole thing, go back to sound money, in my opinion. And doesn't it also help our overseers who also deal in dollars and dominate the world's financial system? Whom does it help? Who does it help? Who does it help? More on a relative basis. Aren't we just making our masters stronger relative to us, further bolstering their grasp over us? Are we really building American empire, or are we is it parasitical on America to build the international Jewish empire and greater Israel? Now, see, I think we disagree, he and I, on this overarching point, and I've seen him make the points. I very much don't think I think, as I've said endless amounts of times, and quite frankly, I think is very easy to prove, that it's about Zionism through the Jewish religion, which is exactly the history, which you can prove to yourself. But that does mean there's a Jewish overlap to this. But to make it just about the Jewish empire, I flatly disagree with that. I think there's tons of Jewish people that are right now screaming about what Zionism is doing. I think that makes the case very clearly. And I think on top of that, you can prove, going back to where this really, not that there's not overlapping point, go back to the Ashkenazi point. There's very clear points to make. My point is where we're dealing with today stems directly from the Zionist creation of Israel. I think that's very obvious. So I think it's important to not over-focus on one element, because Herzl and all the founding elements of Zionism were atheists or non-religious. Easy proven. I've made this point many times. You can ask Rock if you want. I'll tell you the same thing. But anyway, the point is that this is what we're talking about. The Zionist Greater Israel project that is a globalist agenda that is very much being leaned into and selling out American interest by people telling you they're America first. And it says, which will then allow them to dominate us even harder. Or they already do. He says, in my opinion, they're playing on our collective American ego and creature comforts to sleepwalk us in a digital control grid. Yep. Project Stargate, CBDC, AI, all that. Yep, I agree. And it says, I'm at the point now where if they want something, I don't want them to have it. Simple as that. Is Venezuela really a Monroe Doctrine? Or is the globalist Talmudic doctrine selling you snake oil labeled as Monroe Doctrine? Now, look, it's an interesting framing to me. I don't understand why we think that this makes sense. Why is it something that we agree with, that we should argue that somehow South America is just our sphere of influence and we control? That's a globalist mindset, that we are influenced, that America, or just one state, is the policy setter for everyone in that sphere. That's very much a step in that direction. So why is it basically it's being framed in a lot of ways by people I wouldn't expect as somehow like that it's almost a good thing. I just don't understand where people's minds go with this stuff, guys. But overall, I agree with most of what he's saying there. And Gen X Girl makes some great points on the back of this. And she says, very nice analysis. Here are two additional examples. Now, and this is important for a lot of reasons down here while she's playing. Oops. Saying timeline of U.S. sanctions that fueled migration. Elon Musk's uranium goals in Venezuela. So first, if you watch this play out, it's an exact correlation, is that when they increase the sanctions, guess what? It drives migration, because you're making people's lives suffer, or rather you're making people suffer. You're creating circumstances that make people starve to death. You're creating circumstances where people lose their money. So you're driving people to desperately flee from a bad situation and then blame the government of Maduro. That's what you do. That's what they did in Iran. That's what they do in Syria every single time. But so what you can see here, just to quickly speed it up, is the reality that as they increase sanctions, it skyrockets migrants. And then they turn around and blame that on anybody else they want to, and then use that to attack you, Americans, use that to remove your rights and claim that it's, you point to another part of our own country and saying they did it to us and now we're fighting within them. And it's just a very lazy dynamic. I say that for a reason, by the way, because you could make an argument that was much like you could find things that you could even create false situations and point to them. They're just making up narratives that are completely rudderless. I don't know why. I honestly go back to the point that I think it's because there's an interest in making this country look ridiculous and collapse. But right here is a part of that. The weaponized migration, you cannot deny, is driving, at least in part, from Israel's agenda and their religious Zionist perspectives. They'll openly tell you that the way they bring this on is to flood the West with immigrants. It's insane how clear this stuff is. But here is important to understand that whatever you think of that their actions have literally driven this. Is that because Zionists are driving that from our government? Possibly. Is it because their belligerent actions are causing it? They don't care about the outcome? Possibly. You can decide. But she points out another really important aspect to this that I hadn't considered. Elon Musk's motivation to overthrow Maduro. Uranium. Very important. Now, my mind, it's just one more part. So yes, it is part, but one more part of a multifaceted agenda, as always. But this is really interesting to me. So two things to talk about here. One is that this is just one more, interest in exploiting this country. But ask yourself, actually, I'll wait to make that second point because I'm going to show you something next. So here's her article. Elon Musk's motivation to overthrow Maduro, uranium. At first glance, Musk's obsessive opposition to Maduro is a bit of a head scratcher. Why is this guy so obsessed, and why has he joined a squad of nefarious actors with a history of working to overthrow governments and spread state-backed propaganda? Well, first of all, he did the same thing with Bolivia, and he said, we'll coup whoever we want. Lithium, right? That's very clear for his AI interests. But he goes on to list a whole bunch of state-backed propaganda groups they've overlapped with. And it's pretty sure it's U.S. politicians, Blinken, gateway pundits, and all these people that are just, bought armies, Israeli influencers, and she tags a bunch of stuff. It's out there. It's like when I say Alex Jones and so on. Like, there's plenty of times where he says things you could point to that aren't inaccurate, but there's an endless amount of times that you can prove in real time that he's straight up lying to you. So that's the point they're making here with the statements, or rather the links, is that state-backed propaganda, they're provably deceiving you when it comes to very important agendas. But she says, a good example of a leader aspect, or rather a puppet, Javier Milei, is a bit of a clue, she says. Since taking office, he has sold mining rights to his country's resources to an array of global resource pillagers. That's exactly what they want everywhere, guys. You think, look at what happened to Argentina. They basically collapsed. They had to be bailed out. This is because they're out there exploiting this country and then just going, yay, libertarianism, yay, freedom, yay, MAGA team, and then just dumping around with, it's a show. It's performative theater because what he's doing has hurt the country. And it goes on to say, while his country has spiraled into poverty. So what natural resources does Venezuela have that Elon Musk wants? Well, she points out uranium on top of everything else. Venezuela does not mine radioactive minerals, but the government estimates that it sits on 50 tons of unexploited uranium. Now it says, you may not think 50 tons are very much, but if you look at the top list of countries with uranium, Venezuela actually sits in the top 20 behind Jordan. So it's relevant, guys, especially if they're already mining these elsewhere. This is an untapped resource. Now it says the listed countries all have established uranium mining with contractors. Venezuela does not. For anyone looking to tap into a resource that's needed for nuclear energy and say nuclear thermal propulsion, like Elon Musk, Venezuela is an untapped little gold mine, or should we say uranium mine. She said it's no secret that Musk is a strong proponent of nuclear energy, but his interests in the specific location go beyond wanting to fuel the world with alternative energy. He wants to be, and it's her argument, but I agree, the pioneer who landed humans on Mars. And this seems to be a very important aspect of that potential drive. Now it says, DARPA and NASA in 2022 worked on this overlapping point with nuclear thermal propulsion, and SpaceX was working with NASA in the same direction. Now it says China, in March 2024, China announced the completion of a prototype engine for a nuclear-powered spaceship to Mars and a successful global test. So they claim. As always, we should question whether this is a new space race kind of thing. But it says their announcement indicates that they are far less ahead of the competition from Musk's perspective, and Musk may not achieve his legacy as the first man to land on people on Mars, which I think we know, especially with Musk and Trump, that they're very insecure when it comes to their legacy. I think that's pretty clear, even though they're, the richest man and whatever else, like they're so clearly overzealously going after what they think is who they're seen as, right? At least as I agree with that. And so if China suddenly starts to appear to be the one that might do it first, what might they do to make that get what they want? Is the argument. And so what does this have to do with Venezuela? She writes, well, China and Venezuela have developed a very close relationship over the last decade, positioning China as a lead contender for any licensing rights to mining uranium. So on top of the oil discussion for Venezuela, which China was very clearly invested in, there's also uranium overlap, which would, again, go back to the original conversation, add more to the story of whether China might have been involved in an agreement because they're so invested. Now, Venezuela and Western looters is the title. It says, Venezuela's natural resources are state-owned. Western corporations and governments have long wanted access to Venezuela's natural resources, but the hindrance as of late has been Maduro's socialist government who controls these resources. Due to a century of bad geopolitical relations with the U.S. and Western colonial states seeking to control Venezuela, culminating in a nearly 1,000 Western sanctions, which is just probably even more than that, on the country, Venezuela, under Maduro, it broke relations with the United States, which means no licensing rights for any of the mining of the U.S. Now, right there, you can clearly make the point that that was not because of anything other than their belligerent foreign policy. And had they not done that, these companies would still be profiting from the oil industry in this area. Now, it says what the U.S. government and Western corporations would like to happen is for Venezuela to be governed by a U.S.-backed figure like Javier Milei. Not him personally, but somebody like him in Argentina, who is privatizing his country's resources to global pillagers. Cue Maria Corina Machado, which, as we just went over, doesn't seem to be what Trump's leaning into, but we have yet to see this play out. It says the U.S.-backed leader, at least, and still was the time and still is by a lot of the U.S., of the opposition party, who is behind several attempts at overthrowing the Venezuelan government, including, as we pointed out, literally asking Netanyahu to regime change the country in a written letter in 2018. And it says, overthrow the government and install her as the leader after that, and an offense that barred her from seeking election for 15 years. I mean, think about that. I mean, obviously, if you're reaching out to a foreign government going, come put me in power, and then she gets removed and they make that to be the illegitimate government and she's the real one. It's quite obvious what's happening. All of the actors listed at the beginning of this article support Machado and her puppet presidential candidate, Gonzalez. Elon Musk has dedicated every day since election night to express his support for Machado and fuel the overthrow of Maduro. While the motivations are not identical, they do have a commonality, which is installing a U.S.-backed leader who will grant access to Venezuela's natural resources and sever ties with U.S. Western rivals like Russia, China, and Iran. For Musk, this is an opportunity to solve a resource obstacle by gaining control of an untapped uranium mine for his Starship endeavor that will require the nuclear thermal propulsion integration. Musk is not unfamiliar with cutting out the middleman in the mineral acquisition process. In 2023, when Musk realized that lithium refinery obstacles were a hindrance to his Tesla output goals, Musk and Tesla broke ground on a massive Texas lithium refinery in order to gain better access and efficiency. Additionally, Elon Musk, the Boring Company, is involved in the construction of tunnels, which involves excavation. So this move is well within his wheelhouse. Let's also not forget that I think his interest in driving or supporting the regime change in Bolivia was for the same reason, right around the same timeframes. It says, for someone like Musk, she finishes, whose goal is to leave a legacy behind that changes human history, she says, I can see the trade-off of destroying and subjugating an entire nation to the whims of global looters is worth the opportunity to change human history. But as one among the humans, perhaps he should consider the rest of us whether the rest of us believe it's worth it. That's a good point. Now, I mean, I do believe there's clearly an asset here, and overlapping that with just seizing it for the interest. Think about the bigger point about Iran. I mean, it's so frustrating that the conversation is that they're not allowed. I mean, even now, just to make missiles because they might have this. I mean, this is just not legitimate. On top of the fact that every country in the world has a nuclear program, both civilian and weapons, by the way, other than very specific cases who either can't or, like with North Korea, were forbidden. And then they did it anyway. And now suddenly they don't even come up in the news anymore. That seems pretty clear. On top of the fact that now you have Iran, who, by all accounts, including Tulsi Gabbard, is not seeking a nuclear weapon, but they're refusing to allow them to have a nuclear program. That's enriching uranium, you understand. So, keeping this in mind, where there's an uranium interest in Venezuela, here's what the U.S. Department of Energy just posted yesterday. U.S. Department of Energy awards $2.7 billion to restore American uranium enrichment. I mean, of course, that's all because of energy and Yeah, you think that's not going to be weapons too? Because they never really stop, guys. This is the whole nuclear proliferation treaty. It seems like that doesn't even matter because all of them are continuing to, they're supposed to be slowly decreasing their stockpiles. No one does that anymore. And they're very clearly leading into tactical nukes and all kind of very alarming stuff that Trump largely spearheaded. Now there's putting almost $3 billion into continuing to enrich uranium. Think about how insulting it is to claim they're not allowed to, while they're not even doing what they claim they're doing, while you guys ramp up your interest, even though this is in contradiction to what's supposed to be a decrease of, because realize it's not about energy. I mean, it is, but at the end of the day, if they're doing this, it is going to be about weapons. There's just no way around that, especially since, feel free to look it up, the endless amount of times Donald Trump has leaned into the tactical nuke discussion. It says the U.S. Department of Energy today announced $2.7 billion to strengthen domestic enrichment services over the next 10 years in support of Trump's commitment to enhance energy security and reduce reliance on foreign suppliers. The historic investment expands U.S. capacity for low-enriched uranium and jumpstarts new supply chains and innovations for high-assay low-enriched uranium to create American jobs and usher in the nation's nuclear renaissance. Now, look, I mean, the idea of whether Americans want nuclear power, I personally don't think that's the right path. But, it's not like I think it's really comes down to the fact of how it's used, how it's exploited, and what it means. Because, look, what they're doing right now, even though there could be very clear paths to doing the same industries without exploiting areas, without fracking the way they do, in a number of things. My point would be that same thing with this is if there's ways you could do this that wouldn't necessarily destroy the environment or not consider themselves at all. But they don't do that. And I think the real point is just the insulting nature of what they're doing with Iran while they're leaning in heavily to this, whether energy or not. It is. It's contradictory. It's insulting. It's also illegitimate in regard to, there's no legal reality in which they can just declare Iran can't do that. They do it anyway. Now, on top of that, Adam Cochran points this out. Dawson S. Field, actually back in 2024, made this thread. But it says, what the hell? Trump's chief of staff was literally a Venezuelan lobbyist? That's Susie Wiles for you. For a wealthy Venezuelan tycoon who wanted to oust Maduro. What do you know? And who, in the first Trump administration, said they would lift sanctions on the person if he helped oust Maduro. So this is interesting. Now, just for time, I'm going to cut not going to read through the whole thing. I was going to. Read this, though. There's a bunch of good stuff in here. He just kind of goes down the timeline. It's not that long, but goes down the timeline. Former GOP member of Congress indicted for being a foreign agent of Venezuela. Funny how often that happens, and we don't ever talk about how these people are all selling out to the highest bidder. But cut to the chase, goes through a lot of kind of timeline development. He simply highlights that, we'll read the second one into it. In Venezuela's case, they hired Fusion GPS, of course, to do investigations and public relations for them, and that effort somehow succeeded in keeping Venezuela off the Treasury's Patriot Act list of primary money laundering concerns. Now it gets really interesting when you realize Trump's, and this is at the time, Trump's planned chief of staff, 2024, that's who says Susie Wiles, was running Gorin's registered lobbyist campaign to influence Trump for the interest of overthrowing Venezuela. So here you have her lobbying for that purpose, becomes his chief of staff, and then we see this carry out under his administration. I mean, it certainly could just be a random alignment of events, but my God, I think what we come down to is that there's a lot of moving factors behind the scenes. None of it is ever about American interests, about liberty, about moral, about international law. It's about whatever interests them. And the rest is narrative. Now, let's not forget this moron, okay? This is from 2019, from Jason Ditz from antiwar.com. Venezuela's Guaido seeks military aid for regime change. This is the guy they told you was president years after that was embarrassing and still stuck with it until suddenly Trump needed something from Maduro and they just went away and started dealing with Maduro. I mean, you have to laugh at how dumb this is. And so now you want us to believe, now it's not even Gonzalez, the guy you just told us was in fact elected. Now it's just the VP of the guy who told us is a terrorist, because that's okay. And you can't even make sense of this without laughing. But here we are. Now, in regard to who's in charge, I think we're going to end with that, unfortunately, just for time. And I like I said, I can get into this part later more, but I already showed you this, but it just gets more in depth, but it'll be better to flesh it out anyway. We'll end with this part about who's in charge. He said the news put this clip out on the 4th. You've probably already seen it, but apparently it came out that Trump might have just spoke off the cuff with this, and that kind of caught everybody off guard. Who's to say whether that's really the truth or that's just what they want you to think? But the way they respond and continue to this day is it says a lot.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we're going to stay until such time as we're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place.
The president said today that the U.S. is going to be running the country. What does that look like? Does that mean we're going to see Americans on the corners of Venezuela, in the government of Venezuela? Are you prepared to have troops on the ground in Venezuela?
Well, it means we set the terms. President Trump sets the terms, and ultimately he'll decide what the iterations are of that. So ultimately, we're going to control what happens next because of this brave decision. President Trump has shown American leadership, and he'll be able to dictate where we go next.
Mr. Secretary, who is in charge? Are you running Venezuela right now?
Yeah, I mean, I keep people, fixating on that. Here's the bottom line on it is we expect to see changes in Venezuela. Changes of all kinds, long-term, short-term. We'd love to see all kinds of changes. But the most immediate changes are the ones that are in the national interest of the United States. That's why we're involved here.
But, Mr. Secretary, I think there's a lot of questions about who the point people are during this transition. President Trump said we're going to run the country. So is it you? Is it Secretary Hegseth? Who are those people who will be running the country specifically?
Well, it's not running, it's running policy. The policy.
It's just deflection after deflection every single time. I mean, Hegseth is clearly more of a yes man, just so desperately wants to please Trump. It's very obvious that he just goes, whatever Trump's amazing choices will be, we'll follow them through, whatever. But Rubio, clearly, we know historically they hate each other. That's been very clear. So this is more of he's not much of a yes man, but he is a team player, right? So here he is just clearly avoiding the obvious. Of course it's important you guys said you're going to run the entire country and that's completely illegal. Then yes, we want to know what you mean by that. And they just keep acting like everyone's over focusing on that small point. We're going to only control policy. You mean policy? You mean the country? You mean literally the choices of the government? This is playing on ignorance of the average people. If you don't know that controlling policy is controlling the country, then what are we doing here?
See, with regards to this, we want Venezuela to move in a certain direction because not only do we think it's good for the people of Venezuela, it's in our national interest.
It just so happens to be the same thing, right? Why don't we ask Venezuelans? Do we think that selling out to foreign oil companies is in the interest of Venezuelans? Has that ever been the case? He knows that's not true.
It either touches on something that's a threat to our national security or touches on something that's either beneficial or harmful.
And are you involved in that?
Right. So you see, he said it's beneficial to Venezuelans, but also important national security. And then went on to make two very clear points that are only about national security. It's either good for us or it hurts that. They don't care about Venezuelans. It's actually embarrassing that anybody's actually out there making that argument. That's why you've got all these very, very, very ridiculous people on Twitter sharing AI-generated information, and Alex Jones and everybody else is cheering on the city because they're team players. And you don't think they know? They know we're calling them out, guys, and they do it anyway.
Transition.
So obviously,
Secretary?
I'm very involved in this. Well, of course. I think everyone knows I'm pretty involved on politics in this hemisphere. Obviously, as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, very involved in all these elements. The Department of War plays a very important role here, along with the Department of Justice, for example, because they're the ones that have to go to court. So this is a team effort by the entire national security apparatus.
Right. Don't blame just me. We're all guilty.
Of our country, but it is running this policy. And the goal of the policy is to see changes in Venezuela that are beneficial to the United States, first and foremost, because.
Right. Exactly the point. First and foremost, what's best for American interests is what we're going to put on the Venezuelan people. So first, from an American first perspective, you might go, yeah, but that's actually not what they're doing. It's not you. They're doing it for them and their inner circle, not Joe on the corner. Okay. On top of that, explain for me why first and foremost, we want to make sure it's what's best for American interests is Venezuelan democracy. These people are completely trapped. They've painted themselves into a information corner. You can't, I've always said, guys, you can't just lie about every single possible thing and then expect us to not recognize that you're contradicting a previous manipulation. That is ridiculous. So over here, they're going, we're doing it for democracy. And then, but it's about only American interest first. Then that's not about their democracy. It's not about you could maybe argue that everything Americans want is exactly what's going to interest Venezuelans, but it's not true. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a discrepancy, guys. And it's not only about Maduro's government. Look at what Venezuelans are talking about. Why do you think they're voting in different ideological governments? And you can prove that despite the government narratives. But it's important to make these points despite how obvious I may find them.
That's who we work for, but also we believe beneficial for the people of Venezuela.
Yeah, right. As a secondary afterthought, but also maybe for them too, but we don't care. So here's an article from New Republic. Trump wants Stephen Miller to have a terrifying new role in Venezuela, which has essentially been the reality, but it's like I said, everything's fluctuating. Very well could be get him out of the way. Everybody sees what a maniac he is. We'll find out. But right now, just like most everything going on in this administration, even over the dual position Marco Rubio, Miller seems to have more power than anybody. That's not even my opinion. That's a very common take from within the political conversation right now. And he's an appointed advisor, apparently appointed by Israel, if you want my honest opinion, as always. So in this conversation, it's right here. What's important are a few different things. And it's about the fact that he's in the position in every possible way, but what he's ultimately doing, what he's been around before, like in charge with, immigration and so on, but who benefits from all this? Donald Trump is reportedly weighing whether to tap the notoriously anti-immigrant deputy chief of staff to oversee Venezuela in the coming months, according to at least one insider that spoke with the Washington Post. Miller played a central role in the U.S. efforts to oust Venezuela's leader. That plan came to a head late Friday when U.S. military forces successfully captured Maduro, hauling him back to Manhattan on narco-terrorism charges, which are very unlikely to hold up in any honest court. The decision, in turn, could hand Miller outsized influence regarding the future of the country. Miller might be tasked with the day-to-day, nitty-gritty responsibilities of supervising the regime change that we're supposed to pretend isn't happening under the office of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. That sure doesn't make sense to me. And on top of the fact that everything we just listed off, which many of which is in Israeli interest, would allow him to dictate the outcome for those interests. So it wouldn't be about American people, let alone Trump's administration, at the very least. It says Rubio, and I'm going to add this part too, a longtime Venezuela hawk, would be the more obvious choice to oversee the regime change, but his schedule is unfortunately already backed up. Really? I mean, that just seems like a ridiculous argument. Clearly, you could be like, even if you're just overseeing it and he's doing it, you'd be in charge. This seems to be an excuse to be like, I'm just so busy, I can't even be involved in the one thing he's always been fighting to accomplish. I find that really hard to believe. It's like overthrowing Iran with Bolton behind you and going, Bolton's going to take a back seat on this. He's going to be over there. He's not involved because he's just so busy. Bolton would burn everything down to be able to watch that happen. Same thing here. He is so obsessively focused on Cuba and Venezuela his entire career. It makes me laugh that they argue he's just too busy to be involved. The Trump administration has tapped Rubio to serve not only as Secretary of State, but also as National Security Advisor since Trump's last pick, Mike Waltz, accidentally, admitted journalists into a classified signal group chat discussing an imminent bombing of Yemen. Oh, is that all, guys? Even this independent platform, seriously? Or was it very clearly that he was using an Israeli intelligence archive app that was archiving their signal chat? And the story got pivoted into Signal. Oops, we got a journalist in there. That almost feels like the obvious effort to deflect from the fact that he was using, and this is not a Israel run. This is an Israeli intelligence archive app that's tied right to the government. You can go through and watch this for yourself. It's called Telemessage. And they were literally, or rather Walsh was literally using that inside the inner circle conversation. As I titled it, State Department revealed to be using Israel intelligence linked chat app involved in Trump admin hack. That's insane to me. I mean, it's the point when I'm making there about this is we're talking about people who are in intelligence versus people who are claiming to be post-intelligence. Even though linked is what I use in the title, the point is there's a difference between the people who are like, for example, the Stardust Solutions point. Actually, that's the bad one since they left their positions of nuclear scientists for Israel's nuclear division to do this. But actually, I take that back. I think they might still be involved. The point was the people that are claiming to be like retired intelligence running a new company versus those that have current connections to intelligence. And there's plenty of those too. That's my point here, is you can prove that. Plenty of them. So that means you have direct connection to their inner circle conversation, which Walls is one of the many who is a clear Zionist. So it's wild to me that nobody's honest about that conversation, or at least not honestly reporting it, maybe not even deliberately. But it says Miller was deeply involved in efforts to spark a new war on drugs, fixated on Mexican cartels, the ones they're working with, and Mexico's alleged drug traffickers. But when that fell through, Miller shifted his gaze to Venezuela, leading the charge on a classified directive in July that would lay the groundwork for months of airstrikes against small watercraft in the Caribbean, inciting new tensions between the U.S. and its supposedly new puppet state. Okay, so if you can walk this back and see Miller's posts, memos, whatever, driving this, maybe we should ask whether this has been orchestrated by something else, right? I mean, everything, even James Lee, from his perspective, called this a Zionist op. And it's not that far-fetched to realize it with Singer and all the different parts involved. And Miller seemingly driving the bus. I'll include this show. I really recommend you watch this again. I find this to be insane, how little attention this really gets. And here are a couple of clips. We'll end with a few of these just to show you that they're not even hiding this. As Saul Staniforth points out, occasionally they spell it out for you. Here's Waltz himself telling you why they're really doing this in front of the United Nations.
Cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States.
That couldn't be more clear. We can't continue to allow resources that we covet to be in control of anybody else. That's called national security, in case you got confused there for a second. National security is now, I'm going to take whatever I want because freedom, because might makes right. Listen to a bunch of these cackling idiots out there today. Apparently that's democracy. I mean, this is where you get into the inversion of words and that we're speaking the same language, but apparently not the meanings of the same words. That's not supposed to be what we talk about, guys. That's supposed to be that's the quiet part. This is the quiet part out loud. You are openly saying, and this is what I'm talking about with why would that be the case? Who does that interest? It doesn't interest Americans because we're angry about that, even Republicans. It doesn't interest the American government because it makes them look like belligerent criminals. So ask yourself, who benefits from that? I don't think it's that secret. Here, Aaron Ruport points out what Miller had to say. We watched this morning with AM Wake Up, and this is just, it speaks for itself. As Steve pointed out this morning, even Tapper is sort of just like going, like getting tired of having to go, because Miller just goes off on this rant about we're the superpower, we could do what we want. And they've never signaled it this clear. Even though this has always been the case, regime change, fruit companies and so on. We know the stories, right? They always pretended this was about something more than just we're in control and we're powerful. So no, we will, as Trump even recently said, we'll no longer allow our reputation to be undermined or whatever he said about the global, this is a dictatorial, this is an authoritarian stance. Don't forget, remember he said the plenary authority, which is like straight from a Nazi dialogue, and he got cut real quick and he just went silent for like 30 seconds. And he was like, hello, you still there? Very weird. And then CNN cut that part out. Because they're not fighting each other, guys. Was this the one? Hold on, where was that? Oh, here it is.
Was very quick to say that the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, opposition leader Machado in Venezuela, doesn't have the support in Venezuela to become the next president or the interim leader. And I wonder where he got that from, given that her cutout, Gonzalez, won the election last year 2 years ago, overwhelmingly, 70% of the vote or something like that. Why does the president think that Machado should not be the next leader? Why does he think she's weak?
Oopsie, right? And so this is humorous in its own right, because look at what just happened right there, right? That's not supposed to be what he broke the narrative. And whatever reason, which tells me there's another factor, not just typical U.S. interests, right, about selling us, as they always do, on whoever puppet they want in place. There's something else involved. So Trump comes out and goes, not her, we want the other, this is what we're going to lean into. And there's just a different play happening. Now, look, I can be objective and stand back and go, who knows? Maybe Trump is out there double crossing the deep state. I just highly doubt that for 1,000 reasons you could logically make, but who knows? Maybe he decided to suddenly go, I'm going to lean in with the person who's going to fight for Venezuelans. Certainly possible. I mean, we should consider things like this, but there's a ton of evidence that shows you what's really going on. We went through it all today, but I just think it's interesting. I'm going to listen to it again, and I'm going to pull it back a little bit and play this through.
In Venezuela to become the next president.
And the point last week was simply to remember that means Trump admitted to you that they were lying to you. Gonzalez, or at the very least, now he's lying to you and hiding the fact that they were actually winning. Either way, there's dishonesty here. I think it's because they clearly wanted you to believe that she was actually the one that won, or rather he was, and they were going to take power. So they lied to you about that. And now it's very clear, and it always was if you cared to look, that nobody actually supports them. Just like nobody actually supports the Shah. Not really. They don't have popular support, but they push it anyway because that's their agenda. And for whatever reason, you could decide, Trump decided to change that on a dime, and I think that's what he tends to do. And even, Jake Tapper's going like, that doesn't make any sense. Here's how Miller responds.
Interim leader. And I wonder where he got that from, given that her cutout, Gonzalez, won the election last year 2 years ago, overwhelmingly, 70% of the vote or something like that. Why does the president think that Machado should not be the next leader? Why does he think she's weak?
First of all of Venezuela experts agree. All Venezuela experts agree that it would be absurd and preposterous for us to suddenly fly her into the country and to put her in charge. And the military would follow her, and the security forces would follow her. This is not a serious. It's not even a serious question.
So should there be an election?
Let me. If you give me the floor for 30 seconds.
Right. So it doesn't make any sense to bring in the person we've been continually telling you is actually in charge. Right? I mean, why not? Like, of course, the idea then is that, well, nobody's going to support her. Well, then what are we talking about? All right, so if you're going to make the argument that the military forces are still in power and side with Maduro, then why did he get taken from them while they were there? Like there's nothing. This is them trying to cultivate a narrative out of thin air.
Let me tell you what we are doing here, Jake. The United States, this is sort of foundational. The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere.
Right. See, that's clear. That's the Monroe Doctrine. But he's, I guess, just proudly stating that, even though that is not legally reality. So using your military to force your interest on a foreign power is called a crime. Period. Doesn't matter. It happens a lot because governments pretend it's okay because they're bad guy, but it's a crime. There's no legal reality there. So he's just standing there going, this going forward is going to be the truth. We can do what we want because we're strong. Deal with it. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Rampant lawlessness.
We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower.
Yeah. See, that's just hubris, guys. I'm powerful. Shut up. That's his response.
It is absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us.
Okay, so let's be clear. Resources, meaning oil, right? He's not even talking about the criminal activity that they claim is happening. That's probably not. He's talking about resources. So what he just said was, we're not going to allow a foreign country to decide who they deal with. If they don't deal with us, we're going to take it from them because it's our national interest. I mean, in what world is this? He's not even hiding that. I'm telling you guys, this is a shift on purpose to get Americans to support belligerents, to support, and maybe they continue to be in control. It doesn't change the fact that we are now a pirate ship. And we always really have been, if you understand the way our governments operate. I shouldn't say always, but for a long time, my entire existence, that's how they've conducted themselves. This person is not on your side.
To hoard weapons from our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States.
Yeah, you mean like you do all around the world for every one of your allies. That's what allies do. You guys are making agreements. You're selling weapons to everybody, including the worst people of the world. In fact, you're arming and supporting most of the worst groups you claim you're fighting. But regardless, the idea that you're not allowed to help and work with other people that we don't like. Yeah, they really are, man. Are you in kindergarten? Like, I don't understand where's the logic of the argument?
Rather than on behalf of the United States.
Sovereign countries should be.
And under that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us. To hoard weapons from our adversaries. To be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States, rather than on behalf of the United States.
Sovereign countries should be able to do what they want to do.
Yeah, right. Now, I said this morning. I hate that we have to agree with Jake Tapper. And it doesn't matter whether Tapper or anybody else said it. That's odd. And see, the question is, why don't they make these points all the time? Whatever reason right now he's making this point, I think it's because Miller is being bombastically obvious about it. Does sovereign countries don't get to make their own choices? Yes. Wow. Finally. Welcome to the show conversation. Like where have they, you could have said that about Syria, about Iraq, about Afghanistan, but they don't, mind you. They're doing it now for some reason. Make sure you recognize that. I don't think Tapper or the rest really, at the end of the day, you could make that point about any number of countries that they're manipulating. But what's important is that he made it now, and it is correct, regardless of Jake Tapper. Why would they have the decision on what they do? Okay, by the same logic, which, by the way, it's actually a good for Germany trying to make deals with Russia, and Trump tried to stop them from doing so. Or the Nord Stream pipeline. We know how that worked out. We just pretend like we don't know that our own government bombed that, right? I mean, it's just wild. So what they're trying to show you is that what I was trying to make, I mean, it's a bad example since they did push back, is that would it make sense for the UK to simply say that U.S. government, you can't go deal with the government we don't like. You have to only deal with us. Well, what would Trump say? Really? Like, I mean, the insanity is to pretend all it is a hierarchy. It's a caste system. Like, they're a lower grade person. We don't have to live. They don't have the power to tell us what to do. So that is might makes right, guys. That is the opposite of what even they pretend they're actually doing, at least to the most part.
The Monroe Doctrine and the Trump Doctrine is all about securing the national interests of America. For years, we sent our...
What happened? Did Syria and Iraq make you safer? Did Afghanistan make you safer? Did Libya make you safer? Did Bolivia make you safer? No, every one of those actions hurt American interests and made your life more difficult because they don't care about you. They never have.
Soldiers to die in deserts in the Middle East to try to build them parliaments, to try to build them democracies.
How is that different than what you're doing in Venezuela? I mean, this guy's a clown. You're talking about a regime change effort and then going in to rebuild. That's exactly what Trump's talking about in Venezuela. He's just, and he probably knows that. This is just what he does.
To try to give them more oil, to try to give them more resources. The future of the free world, Jake, depends on America being able to assert ourselves and our interests without apology. This whole period.
The future of the free world depends on whether the U.S. government can do whatever it wants. Look at our history. Look at the last two administrations, and let's pretend like that makes sense to anybody. Because clearly they're always in the right. They're always this. I mean, does anybody in the world even still go around pretending like the U.S. government just spreads democracy and freedom? I mean, this is not the Barney show, okay? We're not in some kindergarten class. That's like the dumbest thing in the room, guys. But this is, I mean, either him desperately holding on to that narrative or him knowing that it makes us look stupid.
That happened after World War II, where the West began apologizing and groveling and begging
I don't even
and
know,
engaging these
honestly,
vast
what you're talking about right now.
What I'm talking about, Jake, is the idea. And by the way, I know you love doing that smarmy thing, Jake, and I was hoping to be better than that this time.
I asked you about if there should be an election.
Exactly.
Right. It's just so funny. Of course, pivot to attack. Democrats are so stupid, right? He asked you a very point. I think Tapper is ridiculous like all of them. He asked you a question, and as usual, like he'd probably do in reverse, you just tap danced around it and made some sprawling argument about how everything the U.S. wants is freedom. No matter what it is, it's about freedom. That's ridiculous. That's a clown. Like, that's something that's worthy of ridicule because nobody believes that.
I asked you if there would be an election in Venezuela. That's what I asked. I said, why was the president so quick to dismiss Machado? You answered that question. And then I said,
the objective, Jake, is security and stability.
What he did right there was try to brush over the top because when he explained the question he asked, and then Miller was like, wait, yeah, I did ramble for 30 minutes about nothing that was related to that. So we just roll over to the question. We answer it now, It is always entertaining to me to watch these people. And it's ridiculous. And I think it's at a very clear level, most people are, it's like watching an old SNL skit half the time.
Election.
Exactly.
I asked you if there would be an election in Venezuela. That's what I asked. I said, why was the president so quick to dismiss Machado? You answered that question. And then I said,
the objective, Jake, is security and stability for the people of Venezuela. With our help and leadership, that country will become more prosperous than it has ever been in its whole history.
So his answer is to admit that she has no influence. Oops. Because there's no other way to take that, right? If what they did by not putting in there was about the interest and security and stability, then your answer is then she doesn't have any of those things. That's not what he's supposed to say. You understand?
But the woman running Venezuela right now is part of the Maduro regime.
Yep.
There will be conversations, Jake, about all of these guideposts along the way. The reason why I was...
Just ignore the details. Yeah, just stop caring about the facts. Let's get on the broad picture that we're going to save America, freedom. We're going to save you, and it's going to be great. And winning hashtag. Like it's like we keep saying, all flash, no substance. Where is it? I mean, it's in Miller's almost. I almost get the sense he's like really not enjoying this all of a sudden because I get the sense he loves doing this. But right now, he's losing this back and forth, and I just find it to be entertaining, but also important to see how clear this is.
You do. I know You love doing that smarmy thing, Jake, and I was hoping to be better than that this time.
I asked you about if there should be an election.
Exactly.
I asked you if there would be an election in Venezuela. That's what I asked. I said, why was the president so quick to dismiss Machado? You answered that question. And then I said,
the objective, Jake, is security and stability for the people of Venezuela. With our help and leadership, that country will become more prosperous than it has ever been in its whole history. Venezuelans
but the woman
will be richer
running Venezuela
and
right
safer
now is
and
part
more
of the
secure
Maduro
and
regime.
better off. There will be conversations, Jake, about all of these guideposts along the way. The reason why I was giving you that speech, which I know you didn't want to hear, is because you're approaching this from the wrong frame. This neoliberal frame that the United States' job is to go around the world and demanding immediate elections to be held everywhere.
Are you kidding me? I mean, you mean like exactly what Trump's been doing his entire career as president? It's like neoliberal. No, it's the government. It's what you guys do everywhere. Did you not demand that from Syria? You know, like this guy is such a joke. Like, I don't even think he thinks these, I think his reaction, but you know, I take it back immediately. Like the point is, as always, I believe this person is playing a role that's designed to make us look like we're ridiculous. I really do. Like I don't know how else to take this every time he plays these things out.
Immediately, all the time, right away. To create these vacuums.
That's not what I think, but you invaded the country. Went into the country and we seized the leader of Venezuela.
Damn straight we did.
And I'm saying, so is the U.S. going to have new elections?
Is that we're not going to let.
But you invaded the country. Went into the country and we seized the leader of Venezuela.
Damn straight we did.
I mean, guys, I don't know. It's like, I don't feel like I need to belabor the point with this, but you know, it's such a transparent thing. Why is it legal to do that in any sense? You're damn right we did. Like, it's just the brazen standing behind, it's like, I just think it's wild. I mean, it speaks for itself. And it shows you that they're not only doing the wrong thing, but they're proud to do the wrong thing because they're powerful, because that's how they look at themselves. Like, that's the kind of narcissistic, hubris-ridden maniacs these guys are all like.
And I'm saying,
we're not going to let.
So is the U.S. going to have new elections?
Jake, is that we're not going to let Tim Pot communist dictators send rapists into our country, send drugs into our country.
Okay, now we're back right around to the same old rigmarole. I mean, even if every one of those things are true, it doesn't even remotely address the question that's being asked. It's the pivot back into the broad. It's like saying, they hate us because of our freedom. It's the same old that's what it's like. It doesn't mean much. It's rooted in mostly dishonesty, but there are some levels of truth to that, but it doesn't address the point. Fine. Oh, that's fine. That's all happening. What is going to happen with Delcy or with the election, or why would she versus him? The whole point is he's trying to make that Miller's screaming away from. How does it make sense to put the person that's VP to the terrorist you said was running the country in power when you're telling us that she's still influenced by, it doesn't add up to anybody honest, other than they'll do whatever they can, wherever they will, wherever they can, in order to meet their interests, which have nothing to do with American interests, that have nothing to do with making money for Americans, that have to do with power and control and exploitation all the time. And that's what they're doing right now. As we speak, they're exploiting this country, and Miller's out there tap dancing to get you to look anywhere else.
Send weapons into our country.
Okay.
And we're not going to let a country fall into the hands of our adversaries. The future of Venezuela, working with.
Now we're back to that, right? Because if they didn't, China was. No, that's not what wasn't. China was making agreements. And as usual, you prove to the world that you are the belligerent by rushing in and seizing it before they can make an agreement that they were going to meet together.
America is going to be so bright and so to our country.
Okay.
And we're not going to let a country fall into the hands of our adversaries. The future of Venezuela, working with America, is going to be so bright and so incredible and so positive, and we'll have a conversation about everything that you raised. But the priority right now, as the president has been made clear, is a judicious, thoughtful, careful transition process.
And by judicious, he means seizing by force and no process at all. That's how dumb they think you are, if you're watching.
Process to secure a great future for Venezuela and to secure a great future for America.
All right.
And let's just take a moment and just acknowledge, Jake, that what we've witnessed under President Trump's leadership this last week is one of the greatest foreign policy and military victories this country has ever had.
Stephen Miller, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. A lot.
I mean, I have a very low opinion of Jake Tapper and all of them. But what's funny to me is Miller next to any of them, despite all of them being clowns, is so much more ridiculous that he's literally laughing at him. Not because it's the Democrat who hates the Republican, but because what he said was cartoonish. And even to Jake Tapper, it just goes beyond the pale, guys. And if you really take a step back and realize what he's doing, it's like them posting a Top Gun meme and going, "We're winning." It's meaningless. It has no actual value for the reality of the situation. It's just yelling platitudes over the top of what they're doing in hopes that you just go, "Rah, rah, rah, America," and go back to sleep. Sad, really. Stephen Miller. The U.S. is running Venezuela by definition, is what it says. And it says, what the president said is true. The United States of America is running Venezuela by definition. That's true, he said. And this is on that same interview. And he goes on to say, we live in a world in which you can talk about international niceties. That's what he said. And everything else, I guess meaning the law. But we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength. He's not even hiding this. That is governed by force. That is governed by power. I mean, guys, this is identical to historical authoritarians. Hitler being one of them. And it says, these are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. So the laws, according to these people, are power. We take what we want and anybody else has to follow. And the international niceties, I mean, this is just so I've always had my very clear criticisms of, international, anything, the UN, anything. But the idea of, let's say, international human rights, the idea of the right to the freedom of movement, like these are things that are roundly upheld. What he's saying is there is no international law. The same thing that Israel pushes every single time it gets a chance. You think that's a coincidence? That they have the right to legislate anywhere in the world, that they can steal land anywhere in the world. That's what they say openly. I brought this up. Here, I'll bring it up again in case you want to check out the article. And this comes directly from an actual legislative document from the Knesset. It's right here. Feel free to check it. If you actually care, and I'll just go, that can't be real. Look, you'll find that it's real. And it's very clear. They simply go, although we can legislate any place in the world that we can violate the sovereignty of foreign countries, all that, we're not allowed to take the West Bank. That's what their argument is. And that's many of them in the Knesset. Just wild. So Stephen Miller is just basically disregarding the idea of international law, while, by the way, they force that notion down the throats of people they don't like. Even though they're lying about it half the time. International law for Syria, international law for Iran, you revoke the agreements and the JCPOA. They're ridiculous and don't hold anything sacred, but yet they'll pretend that everybody else has to adhere. Or the ICC, for example, Bolton and all the rest. You can't come after us, Lindsey Graham says, because we're not, whatever their narrative is, even though in every way they are accountable or should be. So Elon Musk, here is what Rubio just said. And it's the same kind of idea.
You're wrong in your question. Number one, Venezuela is a major source. And the reason why is the following. And I've seen a lot of this reporting, and it's fake reporting, and I'll tell you why. It says that somehow Venezuela is not involved in the drug trade because the UN says they're not involved in the drug.
Well, they're not, though. Not really. There's some drug trafficking that comes through the country, like a lot of countries. But the idea, as always, of what they're claiming is not backed up by the facts. And as what he's dismissing right there are UN reports that make that case using facts. But that's typical for belligerent, dying empires.
Because the UN says they're not involved in the drug. I don't care what the UN says. The UN doesn't know what they're talking about.
Right. Okay. So screw them. Right. But yeah, I agree that the UN is manipulative or has been manipulated, and there's plenty of points to be made. Doesn't change the fact that that's attacking the source instead of looking at the facts. Well, it's the facts, whether they come from the UN or the last American Vagabond, will show you very clearly that he's lying. There's been tons of coverage on this. That's why they pivoted from fentanyl, because they realized how embarrassing it was that they were caught lying about that. His point, screw the UN, we don't care what they have to say, is international law. And that's not to say that everything the UN, it's not my point, guys. What he's doing is disregarding the only semblance of international dynamic that's there while they stand there and use it against everybody else. It's embarrassing. But guess what Elon Musk writes? Based. It's ridiculous in its own right. But that's what he does. Okay, well, simultaneously, or rather alternatively, 2024, here's Elon Musk. Due to demands by Justice Alexander in Brazil that would require us to break in secret Brazilian, Argentinian, American, and international law. Twitter has no choice but to close our operations. Wow, okay. So back then, he was pretending that international law was so important that he was just going to shut down operations in certain countries because he wouldn't violate it. But over here, he goes, cool, you're so based because you don't care about those things. They're all ridiculous like that. They don't care about anything, guys. These people are all about themselves. They will point to international law when they want to claim Iran's violating it. They'll point to international law when they want to use it to coerce things into action. But they'll always stand back and go, screw them. They don't know. International law means nothing when we want things that we want. They're all the same. And on that note, we'll get into another discussion exactly why they're attacking that and a lot of things across the board, because they are literally trying to redesign our society. It's not even secret. I titled this show, Trump and the Zionist Globalist Technocrats Are Building Your New Society, whether you like it or not. It is quite literally the network state coup, which they call, many of them, tech Zionism. It's not a joke. This discussion, we go over the funding capital, the funding arm for Nomos Capital. Andreessen, Thiel, right? And the point that we're going to get into today, which I will go over deeper, I made recently. I reached out to Jenny Cohen. She does a great job on this. Mark Lutter, who, by the way, has a very clear interest in Venezuela for charter cities, as is outlined in this conversation. And as she points out, whose nonprofit made a lot of money from Thiel-backed emergent ventures in 2018, or more specifically, as it's right here, launched with $1 million grant from Thiel Foundation Emergent Ventures, which overlaps with Mark Lutter, who is the founder of specifically, what's it called? Charter Cities something. It's another company. They're all, my point I'm trying to make quickly is that they're all financially intertwined, stemming back to a very few people. It's the Thiel-verse, the Andreessen, all these different people who are funding this. And he's one, Mark Lutter, of the ones behind one of these elements, one of these driving forces to push in charter cities in a lot of places, Venezuela being one of them. And you can outline that very clearly in these discussions. And on top of that, here is Emergent Ventures simply pointing out grant to Mark Lutter. That's where this overlap comes from. And Mark Lutter responds. So her original post simply said, Mark Lutter, whose nonprofit received money from Thiel, said, we're putting out a white paper looking at Venezuela, assuming this transfer of power does go through. Interesting. Seems like they saw something coming. And he says, at me next time, Venezuela would benefit from charter cities. Interesting. And she responds going, hey, Mark, isn't the devil in the details, including the belief that goals of those who will control or exert influence over these proposed new cities, or, basically who will, in the name of the transparency, will you tell us who's behind the Thiel-backed emergent ventures and has invested in the Frontier Foundation? Will you tell us beyond Thiel and Andreessen and Fisher, who we can prove are involved, has invested in Pronomos Capital or his venture as well? A significant concern for me and others is that your colleagues have expressed a desire to build their own countries, a desire for de-bluification, a desire for abolished public education. Now, my civil point is just about the first discussion, about reimagining our societies, very much in line with exactly what the Great Reset was about. So he responds to that too. And says, hi, I can only speak for that's what it is, Charter Cities Institute. That's what he runs. Our 990 is publicly available. Our goal is economic development, which we are very public about, including publishing papers, hosting events, and podcasts. I don't think we published a paper in Venezuela. I mean, she goes at the article. You can prove it. She goes, hi, Mark. As you know, 990s don't list donors. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, your lack of transparency, RE, the Charter Cities Institute, and Frontier Foundation's donors, does little to engender trust, nor, for many of us, do the known links between your affiliated organizations and the likes of Peter Thiel and Thiel Associates like Joe Lonsdale, a proponent of public hangings, whose school gave a convocation address titled A Defense of Inequality. I hope you will request and make all of your donors public. Now, again, doing your best to be an adult about it and not over-focus on the certain partisan points and just recognize the larger discussion, I find it interesting how clearly this person is obviously fighting for this agenda, which you don't have to argue is nefarious. Maybe it's not. But the fact that it is clearly there's an overlap to Venezuela and the discussion was being had, and that overlaps with the inner circle of Trump, that's relevant. It may just be a coincidence. That is possible, but it's relevant. 7Cs points out, the government just took $1 billion of your tax dollars and gave it to 3 nuclear energy companies so they can be used to power AI data centers, one of them backed by Peter Thiel. This is a rapid thing that's happening, and it is constantly growing while we're looking elsewhere. It's important to understand this. And she also points out, what do Venezuela, Greenland, Honduras, Nigeria, and Freedom Cities have in common? The network state cabal, which includes Peter Thiel, Andreessen, Joe Lonsdale, has been circling them like vultures. Well before we got to all of those things being focal points. Isn't that interesting? You can look, and I've done it myself. Go back and look at all the discussions. Weird how suddenly Venezuela's been focused for a while, but Greenland, Honduras, Nigeria, all simultaneously being Trump's focuses when they all just so happen to be focuses of freedom cities. Yes. Now her little thread in here you can break down, and I'll include that. But here are the parts we need to remember. Startup linked to Peter Thiel wants to build the next great city in Greenland. I made this point. This is February 6th, but this goes back a while. This is a driving factor to why he's now saying this. Here's Trump, or rather, here's Miller in the same interview. Can you rule out the U.S. going to take Greenland by force? Miller says Greenland should be part of the U.S. By what right does Denmark assert control? God, this guy is a monster. Like, he's literally summoning the worst authoritarians in history. I think it's on purpose. But here's Trump yet again saying we're going to take Greenland. We want Greenland.
We need Greenland for national security. Not for minerals. We have so many sites for minerals and oil and everything. We have more oil than any other country in the world. We need Greenland for national security. And if you take a look at Greenland, you look up and down the coast, you have Russian and Chinese ships all over the place.
They're doing it, bad guys. We need it for our interests. Okay. So by that logic, they can just go, we need Europe for our interests. It's no different. It's the same exact thing. I mean, why would it be different? Now, it's way more crazy, but it's about the logical consistency, about the law. Well, according to them, there is no law. It's the fact that we're powerful. So get out of the way, which honestly, plenty of very belligerent people absolutely love. And far too many of them, in my experience, but not the majority. But they're straight up telling you guys, we're taking it. Right? Here's an example. Trump's Greenland obsession may be about extracting metals for tech billionaires. It's kind of the same conversation, guys. AI, the same overlap. Here, Glenn says Trump stands on his plane threatening more regime change operations, including ones of the neocons' decade-long crown jewel, Cuba, while Lindsey Graham stands next to him twitching in glee and ecstasy, is a perfect illustration of MAGA foreign policy. Sad. I want to make sure I don't miss something here. Gosh, I think there was one other thing I was going to show you there. What was that? Oh, you know what? It was something about Joe Lonsdale. Where was that? Hope I didn't actually close that. Interesting. Well, I'm going to get into this. Like I said, that was just me breezing through it. This topic I find very interesting for a lot of reasons, but I don't see that. Let me check one more spot real quick. Because it was included in what she was talking about. It was interesting. Oh, well, I don't see it in there. But the point was that Joe Lonsdale was involved with the same conversation. I feel like I must have closed it by accident because I know that was relevant. It was about him being involved with the conversation around Venezuela, around a lot of different stuff. And it's really the same conversation because he's involved with this same kind of the charter city network state discussion. Dang, where was that? I guess I must have closed that. I do that from time to time when I'm opening. I just accidentally bump something. But back to the point. To rapidly finish here, we're talking about taking Greenland for this, taking Mexico for that. But the peace president, though, Lindsey Graham's all just gleeful about it. Well, the Cradle says, following talks in Paris, Syria's new government, the literal Hayat al-Sham, al-Qaeda, ISIS government. It's not a joke. It's literally what they are. Well, technically an extension of them through Hayat al-Sham, but it's the U.S. government, the one telling you that moments ago. So it's silly to pretend like it's not true. Syria's new government and Israel, nothing weird about that, will establish a U.S. supervised joint group to share intelligence, pursue so-called military de-escalation on the ground, the ones, the military, the escalations they're creating, and coordinate diplomatically according to a joint statement. I mean, just think about how dumb, think about this. On the face, you're talking about a Muslim government, rather an ISIS, al-Qaeda terrorist-led government that's putting forward Muslim interest, and I think there's plenty of that are in their group, but don't forget what Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia told us before, that the people that they've manipulated at the fronts of these groups, ISIS, al-Qaeda, most of them don't actually believe the ideology, or some of the leaders anyway, and that's about manipulating people under them to buy into it. So in this case, think about the idea of Israel, of all groups, collaborating with what is essentially a terrorist Muslim country. Even if what we understand it to be is a manipulation of that through what their policy is, not that Muslims are out there, that it's all extreme Muslim terrorism, which does exist like any of it does. But realize how stupid that is. It's like not realizing that having them work with Saudi Arabia or the rest of it doesn't make any sense when what their ideology shows you is the opposite. It's just wild. Because at the end of the day, if they're fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, then this doesn't make any sense. But the mainstream conversation and the new media they just are happy and content to pretend like this doesn't matter. Very clear. But so regime change, manipulation, occupation, everywhere you look. Hey, look, Elliot Abrams asked about the future of U.S. aid to Israel. Elliot Abrams laments there's new opposition against Israel in both parties. Yeah, guys, because the whole country, every American largely sees what's going on, and they're just unhappy about that. They'd love to make it about hatred, but it's a rather bigotry and anti-Semitism. It's not. It's just not. Some of it, sure. Same time, let me show you an example of why it's not. Here is the Israeli government and the military. This is from January 3rd. Despite the ceasefire, Israeli soldiers marked the new year by randomly firing at civilian homes in Gaza and proudly sharing the footage on social media like they do every day. But let's go on pretending like we don't know exactly what's going on in the country. That's not a joke, guys. They're just proudly posting that they were just opening fire on a bunch of tents in the middle of the night. Probably killed plenty of people we never hear about. That's why they hate Israel, guys. That's why. Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, right? The crown prince of democracy, as Robert jokingly pointed out. This is Reza Pahlavi saying, my op-ed in the Washington Post, which the Washington Post gave him a platform to lie to the world, and says, setting out my plan to bring an end to the criminal regime in Iran, our roadmap to a prosperous and democratic future. You know, the guy who has no popular support, that is just like in Venezuela. They don't support him. But who cares, though? Because it's not about anything other than Israel, U.S. interest. As Miller would tell you, we're powerful. We're going to take it. Lastly, here's Reza Pahlavi. This is the Shah's son. He's saying, I'm sharing my first call with you today. This is today. And invite you, he's speaking to Iranians, to start chanting slogans this Thursday and Friday, 18th and 19th, simultaneously at 8 p.m. All of you, whether in the streets or even from your own homes. Based on the feedback in this action, I will announce the next calls to you. This guy's literally leading an obvious regime change effort through social media that is being puppeteered by the U.S. government and Israel very clearly. He doesn't even hide those connections. Nobody in regard to popular support are backing this guy, but now they're signaling to groups that are going to carry out action, which they'll use to justify regime change. This is where it's going. It happens every time, guys. And I'll leave you with the article from Robert that very, very well outlines the reality of the lack of support this man shares. It's constant, guys. Absolutely constant. Well, we'll leave it there for today. I think we'll end with a clip that's always good to play about Iran. We'll leave it there for today, guys. I mean, you know, it's hard to continue to engage with this seriously when it's just so, illegitimate. I mean, just in every possible way. And my point is always, it's not just that I disagree, I do about plenty, but that it's objectively false. You can prove the opposite in so many ways. And then it's like the Israel-Gaza conversation. You know, you can go back to the very first week and prove right then that they were lying about a ton of stuff. But it took a lot of people a year of genocide to truly realize what was going on. But it's there, guys. It's been there the whole time. If you watch the platform, if you agree with the content, support what we're doing. We can't do it without you. And it seems to be a pretty large shortage right now of people out there who care about being objective and nonpartisan and actually discussing the facts. So thank you, as always, for being here. I can't do it without you. Despite all the attacks, despite all the suppression, all the technical glitches, everything else going on, I wouldn't rather be doing anything else. And I can only do this because of you. I think about that every day. I love you all, as always. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. But I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.